Foster manifesto, and our figures were robust. But the real point of your question, I think, Carolyn, is it enough? Well, first of all, it's the boldest and most ambitious package on offer, and we should be really proud of that. And secondly, I think this is where reform does kick into place under our ideas. So because we want to reform social care and also be more supportive of family carers, that can bring quite a lot of savings as well. And this whole concept of investing to save. So let me take you through some of the basics of it. There are people who are kept in hospital for far too long when they've already had the hospital treatment and can't go into care because the care places aren't there. The care packages aren't there. Their families haven't been given the support to enable them to look after them at home. But it's much more cost effective for them to be out of hospital. Keeping someone in hospital is incredibly expensive. And it actually can be quite disturbing for the patient and their families. So that's where reform and social care reform really comes in. And when we talked in the general election about free personal care, there was a lot of evidence, including from House of Lords select committees and other academic organisations, to show if you go for free personal care, you save the NHS by the end of the decade several £billion. So isn't that the right thing to do? Invest now, get the care better, get a more cost-effective use of taxpayers' money. If we do that, we can really reform our systems.
But Ed, you know, the Darcy report this week, which was commissioned by the new Labour government, said that the NHS is broken. It needs radical reform as well as funding. He said austerity, underinvestment throughout the 2010s and the Lansley reforms, remember them, which he calls calamity without international precedents, and they are all to blame for the poor performance of the NHS today. The architects were the governments between 2010 and 2024, and you know who was in government during part of that? You and your colleagues.
Well, of course that's a fact, but what I would say is I think the health service...
Do you take some of the blame, some of the responsibility for the Lansley reforms and the...
Let me come to that. I will promise you to answer that. But I think a lot of the damage to health and care has been done since 2015. The 2014 Care Act, which Liberal Democrat ministers like Paul Burstow and Norman Lamb got through, the Tories reneged on it in 2015. And because of their failure to take the care reforms that the coalition and the Liberal Democrats had led on, there's 1 million pensioners of disabled people who are not getting care now because the Tories reneged on what we had achieved. And if that had happened, a lot of the problems in the NHS, we wouldn't be seeing them now because you'd have had some of that social care reform already. So I have to say the Conservatives have to take quite a lot of blame for failing to follow through on the reforms that we had led on. And they did things since 2015 like ending bursaries for student nurses, which led to vacancies in nursing staff, which has caused so many problems in so many parts of the NHS. So I have to say, I think a lot of the problems, and I think a lot of Darcy says this, occurred just under the Tory watch only. But let me take your point on. There's been a lot of reorganisations of the NHS over many decades. There's a whole range of them, including the Darcy reforms in 2012.
The Lansley reforms, you mean?
Yeah, you're right, the Lansley reforms.
Don't blame Lord Darcy.
The truth is, many of those reforms didn't deliver on what they promised. And that was another set of reforms. And this is where I think we can be unique in the Liberal Democrats in putting the NHS and social care right at the centre of our plans. So often, governments have failed on capital spending on the NHS, on moving the deck chairs, and they failed to focus on the things that really matter, the health of primary care. If you get primary care right, you make a big difference. If you get social care right, you make a big difference. These are the things we've talked about, and many of those reforms that you mentioned and past reforms didn't do that.
Okay.
So our focus, I think, is right.
All right, lovely. Thank you. And that folded in, I hope Ben Williams in York and Eliza, you didn't mind me folding those questions in, but they're all so relevant and they're quite pressing issues. Can we turn to another issue now that, of course, is familiar Lib Dem territory, Rosie Schimmel in Southwark asks, what's the route to proportional representation? Now it's clear that Keir Starmer isn't going to make significant electoral reforms.
Well, Rosie, thank you for that question. I'm sure there are lots of members here who would have asked that question. I mean, first of all, let's be absolutely clear. We remain completely committed to getting rid of this appalling electoral system we have in our country. Just because we've had the best success we've ever had under it doesn't mean we're in favor of it. Our great party has been in favor of proportional representation for over 100 years, and we ain't going to change our minds now. So we will make the case, Carolyn, and Rosie, you know, we've been making the case for a long time. I can't tell you that it's suddenly going to happen. It's disturbing if Labour, who had actually passed policy on this in the last parliament, remember that? Labour Party conference passing policy on it, don't proceed with those reforms. But there will be colleagues in the Labour parties outside politics who realise this is important. When I go around the country, people feel that our political system just isn't working, that it's not responsive enough, that too many people's voices aren't heard, that people's votes are wasted. And unless we change our electoral system, that won't change. PR unlocks the door to so many reforms, and we will still champion it.
But if PR had been in operation this election, you know what I'm going to say, you would be the fourth largest party behind Reform UK. They got 14% of the vote this time, only 5 MPs. You've got 12% of the vote. You've got effectively 12% of the number of MPs. And 72 of them. What's the fairness in that?
Well, first of all, we'd have had still even more MPs under PR. Let's remember that. But secondly, you know, I think when it comes to reform and the Conservatives, I don't know about you, but I increasingly can't see that much difference. Their policy programmes seem increasingly very, very similar. And when I bother to listen to what the Tory leadership candidates are saying, you know, they don't recognise what a complete mess they made of our country, and they are flirting with reform. So, you know, I think that's the reality, Carolyn. There would have been some Conservative voters voted, MPs voted, but in a different party.
So there won't be a Nigel Ed team up then to campaign together for PR?
He just can't jet ski.
Okay, fair enough. I'll take that as a no then. Let us move on to another question. Sarah Dobson in Reading asks, climate change is an existential threat, and Lib Dems have worked for a long time on what needs to be done to tackle it. But how do we build the public and political will to make it happen?
Great question, Sarah. I mean, it's an issue that is close to all our hearts. And I'm so proud of Liberal Democrats in councils and in Westminster, where we have fought the case for action on climate change. You know, my experience in government working with my Liberal Democrat colleagues was if you got really good action, you actually brought the price of green action down. Renewable power is so much cheaper now thanks to the policies that Liberal Democrats enacted. And that's the way, I think, to win people from all sides of the political spectrum, to show that if you take action on climate, you bring prices down. If you insulate people's homes, it's the best saving they'll ever make on their energy bill. So there are these arguments that we can run, and we can point to the costs if you don't act. We all see the costs of flooding. We see the costs imposed on our farmers. We see so many costs there. I think people are beginning to realize that the most effective thing we need to do for our country and our world is take action on climate change. And by the way, if you go out onto the promenade outside, do remember to wave at the wind farms out there, because Liberal Democrats made them happen.
Actually, I noticed them today. I thought Were they there the last time that we were in Brighton? I can't remember that they were. They're relatively new, I think, but anyway.
Well, we signed the contract for them, and then they got built, so that's the key thing.
Okay, all right. Just on climate change then, obviously you know that there have been various moves in the timetable for going to net zero. Is it 2030? Is it 2035 for cars? Is it 2050 for the overall target? Is it 2045 still, as you have said? But then there's also the expense, and you campaigned during the election on cost of living issues as well as the environment and health. And you know that many, many people say, I just can't afford to put one of these new boilers in, or I can't afford to insulate my home. So when people hear you and other politicians saying, oh, we've got to be aware of the climate, they think, well, I haven't got the money to do that.
Well, I understand that. What I would say is part of the cost of living crisis has come from high energy bills caused by volatile fossil fuel prices. If we remain dependent on gas and coal and all the fossil fuels, you will see high energy prices and high energy bills and the cost of living, because that's what history shows us. So the best way to get bills down permanently is to insulate people's homes. The best way to deal with the cost of living pressures coming from energy bills is to invest in renewables. That is the long-term correct approach. Now, you're right to say, Carolyn, how do we get from where we are now to there? Clearly, you need government support for people who can't afford things. What we did in government through our support mechanisms was get the price of renewable electricity down below that is generated by fossil fuels in a relatively short period by government intervention. So I think we show the way forward, get a real good policy framework that brings in billions of pounds of investment, brings in the new technology, brings jobs to the UK, and brings people's bills down. And I think that is the way forward. And I think we can win that argument. I think the evidence backs up what we've been saying.
And what about those people who turn to drastic protest action to highlight the issue of climate change? Do you believe Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion, do you believe their tactics are counterproductive? Are they turning people off these issues?
Well, listen, I understand how strongly people feel about this issue, because it is an issue that goes to our hearts. When you're thinking about your children and your grandchildren, the future of our planet, of course people feel strongly about it. But I don't think breaking the law is the answer, because I think you lose people, you lose the argument. And we've just won, and other parties have won, who believe the sorts of things we do on renewables and energy insulation through a democratic election. And what our job now is to hold Labour's feet to the fire on this. We've seen some good early noises from Ed Miliband. I will say that some of the things that he's saying on renewables are really welcome. And I think one of the reasons I'm talking about constructive opposition is if the government is doing something that's good, we say that. If they're doing something that's in the national interest, we should support that. But I can assure you from my perspective, from the Liberal Democrats' perspective, we'll be watching them to make sure they are more and ambitious, they're reaching out there, and they're reaching with our international allies, particularly in Europe. Because we've got to get our policies better in this country, and the Conservatives made such a mess of it. They've really got to turn that round fast for our domestic policies, but they've got to do a lot more work internationally. And one of the disasters of the many disasters of the Conservatives is they trashed Britain's reputation internationally on climate change. And they were prepared to see a coal mine open in Cumbria, and I'm so pleased that the courts have struck that down.
So you would work with Ed Miliband where necessary, and going back to cross-party working, things like social care, if there is a royal commission set up, as part of this 10-year plan that Keir Starmer's setting out. Would you happily work with the Labour government again? Because we know what happened last time cross-party talks were attempted on social care, and we're still arguing about it now.
Well, Carolyn, I approach these with some hope and optimism. I think we've got the arguments, we've got the evidence, and we should engage. I think that's a much more mature, constructive way to politics than the Yardley politics you too often see. So whether it's on climate change and renewables, whether on social care, yeah, we want to engage. But be clear, there are two things. First of all, if we disagree, we'll still say that. We'll be really clear. We want to get consensus, but we will be robust for our values and our priorities. And secondly, cross-party talks, Royal Commission, whatever it is, shouldn't be an excuse for actions now which are no regrets and which are self-evidently correct. So take care and social care. Sorting out the carers allowance repayment scandal, that should be done now. Can't wait for a Royal Commission. Getting a higher minimum wage for care workers so we can reduce the number of vacancies in social care. That doesn't need a Royal Commission. That's so obvious. Let's do that now. So yes, cross-party, but don't let that be an excuse for some of the actions that need to be taken urgently.
Okay. Aubrey Claridge in Horsham has an interesting question here. To sustain our electoral success, particularly in the south, how do we square the circle of increased population and housing demand with necessary environmental protections?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I've always felt that our approach, which has been tried in a number of places and which works really well, where you engage with the community about the housing need and about the challenges that means to any community, is the right approach. We've called it a community-led approach as opposed to the developer-led approach that we've seen for decades. And, you know, we changed the law quite a few years ago to allow neighborhood planning. And neighborhood planning is very much like the community-led approach that we advocate, where the community comes together and says, yeah, we'll have these extra houses. That's a good place to build them, but we need so many of them to be affordable. We need water infrastructure built. We need NHS infrastructure built. That approach has been tried following the law that we changed, and a government study of the results of that showed that it was really successful, that more homes got built, that they were more in tune with the needs of the local community. So I think we need to stick to our guns. We need a community-led approach to planning, to build the houses we need, and make sure they are built in a sustainable way. I believe it absolutely can be done. And one of the many reasons I know it can be done is because of my wife. My wife, Emily, is the housing portfolio holder on Kingston Council. She is in charge of the largest council home building programme that our area has seen for over 40 years, and she's doing it in a really sustainable way. And I know there are lots of Liberal Democrat councils who are doing just that. We know it can be done. That's the way forward.
Yeah. But what you call community approach, community-led approach, other people say is NIMBYism. And you and your party and some of your MPs have been accused of being NIMBYs, opposing schemes. Lib Dem run councils have opposed schemes, for example, in South Oxfordshire. You yourself described proposals for thousands of homes being built in Surrey near your constituency as eye-watering. You can't have it both ways, can you? You've just got to get rid of some of these regulations, some of the planning log jams, and get on with building, because people need homes.
Well, they do. They absolutely do. But the problem with that argument, and I had an argument during the general election campaign with Nick Robinson, who gave me some examples of different Liberal Democrat local authorities and campaigners opposing building, and I was able to give him a whole long list of where Liberal Democrats were building. And the truth is...
Not a competition.
But the point is that every individual site has to be judged on its merits. I don't think anyone thinks we should just build anywhere. And I think there are a whole range of things that need to be taken into account. And one of the reasons we've got into the mess we have with sewage is that a lot of development was undertaken without thinking of the water infrastructure that needed to go there. So I have to say, our approach is the right approach, sustainable in so many ways.
Okay. And that's bearing in mind that a lot of your seats now are in overcrowded bits of the southeast, Surrey, Oxfordshire, Hertfordshire, Cambridgeshire. So how do you balance up the being local champions, as you like to call your local regional workers and members of the party, how do you balance it up with sort of detoxifying the brand nationally if people think, oh, the Lib Dems will say one thing in the local area and then another thing nationally?
Well, we've now got 72 powerful voices to answer that. Now we've got the third-party status back again. Now we've got such a fantastic set of colleagues. You're going to hear a lot more from us. And some of the myths that are put about us will be able to challenge more and harder. And because we are running so many local councils now, more to come, I hope and expect, I think we can show that on the ground, Liberal Democrats are squaring that circle incredibly well. It can be done. We are doing it. We will do it.
All right. Thank you. Sam Barrett in Lewisham points out, you might have noticed the election targeting strategy worked. Thanks, Sam. But how do we expand to ensure that we're a party that represents and has representatives across our nations? So, you know, You've got further to go, haven't you? If you want to become the opposition and not the third party, you'd need to take, what, 25 Tory seats? Is that the ambition? Where do you go from here?
No ceiling on the ambition. But let me take you through it. I mean, first of all, let's deal with the Conservatives. If you look at them and you look at our values, I think they're the biggest threat to liberal values in Britain today. I think they showed that in spades in how appallingly they governed. I think you hear that in so many parts of the Conservative Party. So I'm really proud we won so many Conservative seats. I'm determined we win many more. We've knocked down quite a lot of the blue wall. We're going to knock down the rest of it. And when you look at the facts, not only have we taken basically mostly Conservative seats, but in seats where we're second, the vast majority are Conservative seats still. So in a practical way, that's where we can make advance. But, and here's the thing, if we really work our local elections in cities and towns across our whole country, I think we can get the voice of liberalism back in our cities, and we need to do that. You know, so many cities in our country, in my time in politics, were run by great Liberal Democrats. And we want to run them again. And if we do that, if we take a UK-wide approach to building ourselves up in local government, I think we can take a lot more seats the next election.
Are there any no-go areas?
No, why should there be?
Okay. Now, we have a question from Mackenzie Gregory in Baber. What advice would you give to under 18-year-olds who want to get more involved in politics?
Oh, that's a great question, Gregory. Well, first of all, read, study, talk to your friends, talk to your families, and also look at your local community. Do you think it's working right? Are people who are vulnerable in your community getting a good deal? And work out how you want to do something about that. And obviously, young people rightly, I think older people too, can be quite idealistic about the world they want. And I would encourage young people to be idealistic, to think about how you can change our world. And I think it's important that we offer them hope and optimism in doing that. And let me give you one example. When I go to schools and talk about renewable power and climate action, people are interested in that in and of itself. But I say, just imagine a world where we brought solar power to all the villages in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, in Asia and Latin America, in the poorest communities in our world, more than 1 billion people, if they had electricity, which the fossil fuel companies have never brought to them, but micro solar power could, what a benefit that would be to them, to their lives, to their health, to their education, to their economy. So I think renewable power is part of that idealism that I'd want to engage young people in, because it could tackle world poverty. And here's the other thing. It's also about security and peace in our world, because the people who foster a lot of the wars and conflicts and fund them in our world have got rich on oil. You know, where do you think Putin's getting his money from? You know, there are many other world leaders, I'm afraid, who their insidious behavior that causes conflict comes from their fossil fuel wealth. Let's really invest in renewables around the world and put these oil dictators out of business and bring more peace to our world.
Thank you. And obviously, you're campaigning still to lower the voting age. You're campaigning still to lower the voting age. Do you think you've got an ally with Labour now?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, we've voted as a party to get the voting age to number 16 time after time, and Labour promised it, so they need to deliver.
Okay. We've only got a few minutes left. It's a massive subject, but I feel I need to ask it. Chris Hudson in Southwark says Labour's putting growth at the centre of their plans to rescue the economy. How are they going to achieve that while ruling out access to efforts to get our farmers and businesses access to the single market? And of course, that is the big issue of Brexit. I don't know if you'll be going to the Glee Club. I've read about the revised wording of the Mary Poppins song about Brexit, but maybe you won't be singing along to that, will you?
Well, you're better informed than I am about that.
I think it's basically the message from 2019 in song. Don't know if I can say the B word here.
Let me bring you to 2024. What I'd say is that although Labour has made a tentative start to re-engage with our European friends and neighbours, and it's good to see the Prime Minister going to Europe, and as I said, where I see good things, I'll point them out. I'm afraid their approach is too timid. By ruling out Britain going back into the single market, I think they're undermining that rapprochement. We said at the election that should not be ruled out, that should be part of the strategy, and we stick by that. And I don't think our economy and the trade deals we need to strike before we go back into the single market, I don't think they'll be as strong as they could be and need to be to get our economy and our country back on track. And let me give you another example where you could do this relatively quickly, where I think the government is being nowhere near ambitious enough, and that's on the youth mobility scheme. You know, many of our European neighbours are willing to agree a whole range of things, whether it's on crime or on security, on climate change, on trade, and to help repair that relationship. And one of the things they put on the table is a youth mobility scheme. Now, we have a youth mobility scheme at the moment with Australia, with Canada, with Japan, South Korea, Andorra, San Marino. Why can't we have a youth mobility scheme with the rest of Europe? So I'm grateful for the question. We will be pushing forward and hard for a much more ambitious approach on our relationship with Europe.
But what about making your party distinct, having that unique argument, being unequivocally pro-European? I mean, can I do a very quick...
We are unequivocally pro-European, aren't we?
Yeah, but pro-EU. Can I do a very quick show of hands? Sorry to embarrass you. Who would like now the policy to be, we go back in the EU? So Okay, so Ed, I'm putting you on a spot, I know, but is it too difficult politically to start using that kind of language now?
No, I think the issue is you have to rebuild trust with our European friends. That's the issue. I mean, I've debated this with friends and members across the whole country many times. I think we all agree the Conservatives have so damaged Britain's relationship with the European Union that it's going to take a little while to repair. And what we've done as passionate pro-Europeans is said how to do that. We're the only party doing it. You know, we passed policy here at the conference talking about the 4 steps to do that, including getting back into the single market as our objective. We campaigned on that. We'll continue to campaign on that. I think you heard, we know, that if you want to take action on so many things to help the lives of people that we represent, you have to work with our European friends.
Okay, thank you. A couple of minutes left for some quick-fire questions. Indulge me. Okay, first question. Would you go on Strictly?
Well, I'll tell you what, my advisors will want me to go on Strictly.
Okay. Is that a yes or a no? How much do you obey orders from the advisors?
Well, I'm delighted to say health and safety rules sometimes get in the way.
Okay. Now, you did some stunts, as we know, during the election campaign. What was your favourite, and are there any that you wish you'd turned down?
Well, the answer to the second question is no. I got a kick out of most of them, all of them actually, honestly. My favourite was, I think, the slip and slide we did in Somerset with now the MP for Frome and East Somerset, Anna Sabine. I think she told the rally about some difficult manoeuvre she had to make. But let's not go into that now. That was fun. Do you know, I actually enjoyed the bungee jump. Everyone's saying why. The key thing, if you ever decide to do it, is to look at the horizon. Don't look down. Josh, who did it with me, looked down. Do you know what he saw? He saw a cemetery. Oh. So always go for the horizon and jump for the horizon. It can be quite fun.
Okay, maybe the next question ties in a little bit with that, but what do you do that makes your children cringe? Oh.
Well, my adorable little boy John, who has a few challenges in communication, he's got a great sense of humour, and he teases me. I'm not sure if I make him cringe. I do make my daughter cringe.
Embarrassing
quite
dad?
a lot. Yeah, I think if I do dancing to Sweet Caroline, she's not so keen.
What record would be your Desert Island disc?
Ooh, well, you get 6, don't you? Is it 8? Oh, 8, fantastic. Oh, well.
You can give us a couple if you want.
Well, obviously it has to be Sweet Caroline. That goes without saying. Do you know, I was a choir boy when I was younger, and I quite like a bit of church music, choir music. Allegri Misery, how about that? No, thoughts for that? No. That's a surprise.
Yeah. That's good.
What else would I've got a very eclectic taste, you know.
But that's good. That's good.
From Coldplay to Everything But the Girl. It was a stage in my life, you know.
Because you know, some politicians, we won't name them, but people think that their advisors have drawn up the list of the music that they they ought to have been listening to. Would your advisors do that to you?
Well, they'd try. But no, I actually have got loads of different singles. If I had my smartphone here, I'd show you all the different things that I listen to.
All right, well, we will hold that for another time, because unfortunately, Ed, our time is up. That's all we've got time for, so thank you so much for your questions and for you for answering them. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Friends, can I, on your behalf, thank Carolyn?
Thank you. It's all your questions. It's all your good ideas.
And your questions. Thank you for submitting them, and thank you for coming, and enjoy the rest of the conference. And you might want to come on Tuesday, lunchtime, afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Bye. Thank you. Thanks, Carl.
Conference, could I ask people to come to order and to be silent? I have an announcement to make. Conference, it is with great sadness I stand here now to share with you the sad passing of one of our members. I'm sorry to have to inform you that tragically Councillor Robin Bradburn passed away yesterday whilst here at conference. Robin was the leader of the Lib Dem group on Milton Keynes Council, having first been elected in 2010. I want to first extend all of our deepest sympathies to Robin's family. Robin's wife Marie served alongside him in the same ward, and this year is the mayor of Milton Keynes. Likewise, Robin and Marie's daughter Kerry is also a member of the council. Serving the residents of Milton Keynes is a family affair, and they were all very well led in this by Robin. Alongside their daughter Kerry, there's also the son Alan and grandchildren who he loved dearly. To all of them, we want you to know that your wider Lib Dem family is thinking of you. Robin was the leader of the Lib Dem group, and some of his colleagues are here with us, and previously served as the deputy leader of the council when the party was part of a coalition. Robin was renowned for campaigning in the area and also took on roles outside of the council, such as chairing the Thames Valley Police and Crime Committee. Most of all, Robin will be remembered by all those who knew him as a thoughtful, caring and compassionate man. He was optimistic in outlook and wanted the best for all of those he represented. He was at heart a family man and a friend to many of us. Can I please ask, now that we come together as the wider Lib Dem family, to remember one of ours who has passed and to think of all of those who loved and knew him. We will have a minute's silence. Thank you. Thank you very much, Conference. I'm certain that if you see colleagues from the Milton Keynes group, you'll want to express your thoughts to them as well. It's always very sad when we have to share news like this, and we're wishing all of our best, all of our condolences to Robin and his family. Thank you very much. The next session will be starting very shortly, so if I can ask those of you who are staying to stay, and if you're in the back, please do come forward. Thank you very much, Conference, and thank you very much for your thoughts.
if you are leaving the hall, could I ask you to do so fairly promptly and quietly? Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Congratulations to those of you who are staying. Those who can't stand the heat of the exciting discussion we're about to have are now leaving us, so it's us select few left to have this important discussion for the next hour and a half. We have a new government, as well as 72 wonderful Liberal Democrat MPs to hold them to account. That new political landscape presents the country and us as a party with a new set of challenges and opportunities to improve the lives of our fellow citizens and of society. And so, following the example of past general elections, the Federal Policy Committee has set up an exercise to do three things. Firstly, to look at the new, wider landscape of what's happening in society and the world, and what the Liberal response to that should be. Secondly, then to look at our own extensive body of policy and our policy approach, and see how they measure up against what we now need. And thirdly, then, to set out areas where we want to focus on developing new policies over the next few years, with the aim that that programme then becomes the backbone of our policy paper development programme through this Parliament. You will find some brief further information about that set out in the conference papers section of the website. The Policy Committee has appointed a group of about 20 members, chaired by Ed, from among the more than 200 who applied to be on it, to lead that task. And this afternoon, it's really its first activity, which is seeking your views about some of the questions I've set out. Ed and other members of the group are here to listen. Staff are taking notes of the points that you make to feed into that. We're going to structure this, as the paper says, around 4 broad areas and gather comments on each of them in turn for about 20 minutes each. The first broad area is public services. Secondly, boosting economic productivity. Thirdly, other domestic policy questions. And fourthly, international. You'll notice that doesn't explicitly include climate change, and that's because climate change has got its own whole entire separate policy working group, which held its consultative session yesterday morning, and which, of course, you're also very much encouraged to feed into. On the platform here with me are Councillor Lucy Nestinger, my co-vice chair of FPC and also leader of Cambridgeshire County Council and chair of the Lib Dem Eastern Region, and Eleanor Kelly, who's vice chair of the Policy Review Working Group, a member of the exec of Lib Dem Women, and a recent former chair of the Young Liberals. They obviously will be listening very carefully to everything you say, and they will respond at points during the session. Right, let's start off. I'm going to do this by asking anyone who wants to speak to raise their hand, and stewards will bring you a microphone. The deal I want to do with you is this. The aim of this is to gather your views, so I'm not going to ask you to contort your point into a question and ask a question of the panel. That's not the point of this. But I would also ask you to be as concise as you can be, please. And if necessary, I will ask you to just finish your comments so we can move on to other people to contribute as possible. The core question is then, what are the big policy challenges now facing Britain, and what should be our priorities in responding to those? So we're going to start with public services. And I want to ask if anyone who would like to make a comment on this, please put up their hand, and I'll then encourage a steward with a microphone to come to you. So there's a couple of hands. Okay, so there's one there, and then can we have a couple over here, please? So yes, the lady there, please.
Hi. I've been going to quite a few things on education over this, and it's struck me that education isn't really the problem. Teachers are being asked to support with child poverty, basically, and that, for me, is one of the biggest problems we're facing in the UK at the moment. The disadvantage gap is growing, and the health services are falling apart at the seams, and part of that is because parents at home can't afford to support children and young people. So obviously the Labour 2 benefit cap is one of the things there, and I know we support abolishing that. But what else can we do to enable families to support their own children and not put that burden on the education system, on the health system, and on the government.
Great, that's a great start. Thanks very much indeed. There's a couple of hands over here. Could we have a microphone, please? There's a gentleman at the back and a lady a couple of rows in front. So do you want to go first? Gentleman at the back there, and then a couple of rows in front. Thank you.
Hi. My point is a general one in relation to public services that obviously I come from Wales. I'm currently president of the Welsh Party. Many of public services are devolved to Scotland and Wales. And I think having a plurality of ideas actually allows us to look at which policies work in different parts of the United Kingdom. And I would, as a very general point, urge the Working Party to look at the experience from Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland in looking at some of the future policy directions that we could adopt as federal policy. And
wonderful.
In particular, in Wales we have a new national curriculum. This is a huge Lib Dem achievement which was enacted by the great Kirsty Williams, former Senedd member for Brecon and Radnor, who was the Welsh Education Minister in the last Senedd, which frees us from the strictures of the English national curriculum and puts in place a more thematic and child-centred way of learning, which, as a school governor of a primary school in Wales, I can say that both children and teachers appreciate, and which seems to be leading to better achievement.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Could we pass the microphone forward a couple of rows, please? The lady with her hand there. Thank you.
Fiona Gawley, Bath and North East Somerset. I'd like to raise the issue about buses, rural buses in particular. We've seen the problem with the lack of buses and the loss of buses around the country. Our issue in Bath and North East Somerset is that our bus authority is actually the West of England Combined Authority, and there are some issues around that. But one of the most important things for rural areas is the need for public transport. So there needs to be policy around things like franchising, the change of the system where actually commercial buses can decide where and when they're going to go. And I'd like to know what the Lib Dems are going to do about that and what policies can be improved to try and improve the situation, particularly for rural areas.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take a couple of hands from over here, and then I'll come to my panellists, that's okay. So there's just the lady with the microphone, just the gentleman right next to you, and then as a member in the front row, please.
Education. In 2022, 4 major institutions produced major reports in which they called for a review of the content and purpose of education. Times Education Commission, for example, one parent representative said, teachers and pupils are working harder than ever, but the result is not fit for purpose. Now, those are just 4 examples, and there are lots of others, including 1 or 2 speeches by people from various parties in Parliament have been calling in recent years for a complete review of the curriculum and qualification system. Now, this points to me that if we call ourselves a party of education, then we need to take the lead, not simply react. We need to take the lead in bringing forward to this nation a proper, detailed vision of the purpose and future of our education system. And I think that this needs to be done fairly urgently, and if we do it, we will find an awful lot of support for this amongst all sorts of people outside. I know one of the arguments against it is that teachers don't want change because they're under so much pressure. But even the National Education Union was one of the ones that produced a report in 2022 calling for a complete rethink of the whole assessment and qualification system.
Great.
So if even they're calling for it, then we have nothing to worry about, and we have nothing to worry about parents either. We should be bold and take the lead on a new, detailed vision for the purpose and content of our school system.
Thank you very much indeed. Could we have the microphone round to the front row here, please? And then I'll come back to you too.
Bex Fulsham, Oxford Western Abingdon. So the issue I want to bring is SEND education, so that's special educational needs and disabilities. And I'm saying that as an autistic person who has been through the SEND system themselves. And schools are under-resourced to deal with the SEND crisis, and it is a crisis. Teachers are not trained on looking to pupils with disabilities and providing accessible classroom settings and accessible lessons. The exam system is also not accessible either. Special schools are oversubscribed. It is very difficult to get an education, health and care plan. And therefore, more and more children are being excluded. More and more parents are in crisis. I've seen this happen in Oxfordshire. I've seen it happen all over the country as well.
Okay, thanks very much indeed. Thank you. One thing that does strike me a lot from that is the Conservatives have left public services in such a state that we could have quite a long list of almost every bit of public services, and they can't. I think we need. The challenge, I think, is how we get beyond that and look at a sort of strategic approach to the Liberal Democrats and how we can try and solve that at a strategic level as well as just, write a cheque or to have a solution for each of those. Lucy, do you want to go first and then come to Elle?
Thank you. Some of you in here will be aware that education is somewhat my specialist subject, and there have been a number of questions on education, so I'm going to kind of tackle them a little bit in groups. So firstly to Nigel and Tim on the need to review the curriculum. Yes, I think there was some very good stuff in our manifesto, and certainly we've had education policy in the past that's talked a lot about the need to review the curriculum and to think much more about a curriculum which is broad and creative and not just very narrow and box ticking. I think that is also something that is relevant to the point that Bex was raising about SEND. The style of our curriculum at the moment makes it very difficult for some children to access, and I think that that's a really important part of some of the things that are going wrong in our education system and some of the issues that teachers are having to tackle. On the slightly broader point about education isn't the problem, inequality is the problem. Inequality certainly is the problem, but I think there are also issues in education. And I don't think that's an either-or issue. And I think that how we tackle inequality in our society is an absolutely massive topic that I'm quite certain that Eleanor's group is going to have to look at. But I wouldn't want us to not look at other issues at the same time, because I think there are some major issues in the structure of our education system that sometimes help make those problems worse, and that also mean that even families who aren't necessarily in financial difficulty find that their children are struggling in our system. Before I pass this to Eleanor, I'm just going to address the issue about buses. Yes, rural transport is a huge topic and a huge issue. And related to that, so as somebody who is at the moment involved in work in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough's combined authority about bus franchising, I think there's also a bigger question about how, as a party, we respond to the increased power that seems to be going towards mayoral combined authorities, how we make our policy process fit with that and look at it, and how we make the best of variety across the country, because actually mayoral combined authorities can give, alongside what's going on in the devolved regions, new examples of things going well or badly, but we will also need to think about how we are approaching different policies that different mayors want to bring in.
Thank you.
Eleanor?
Just on that broader point about poverty and how that affects education, I think you took the words right out of my mouth, and that this doesn't have to be an either-or situation. I think the beauty of what we're doing with this group is that we can have some real kind of broad holistic approach and some joint up thinking along that. Just about Bex's point on SEND, I think that's going to be one of the more immediate challenges. Obviously now we have more people who are having their special educational needs and disabilities recognised, and it's that knock-on effect. So I think that is potentially going to be one of the priorities in that area. But yeah, we'll see.
Thanks very much indeed. I'm going to come first to the gentleman in a brown jacket there, and then see if there's any hands in the back half of the hall, perhaps.
Thank you very much. Peter Burke, Oxfordshire, GP. Thank you. One thing that I think we have no clear policy on at the moment, and it was omitted from the very, very good motion this morning on the NHS, it was the threat of deprofessionalisation in the health service. And by that I mean that at the moment the Tory scheme to roll out physician associates is having significant effects on patient care and also on the NHS workforce. Now, I have to say, it's nothing against physician associates themselves. Often people are being recruited to this profession in the belief that they can then work independently in the health service and that they can diagnose and treat. But there are people who have a science degree plus 2 years of clinical training and therefore are not equipped to do the work of a doctor or indeed of a nurse. And they're being put into that position because of financial constraints and because hospital managers sometimes can't tell the difference. Now, my view is that the party should be very clear that the NHS deserves a well-trained, effective workforce. We're reaching the point now where physician associates in hospital jobs are taking over from doctors, and to a degree, both in primary care and in hospital, doctors are receiving inadequate training and often being made redundant as a result of this rollout. And above all, the amount of time...
Okay, thanks very much indeed. I mean, you made the point particularly about physicians associates, but there's a whole point, as you said there, about the whole range of different professions and training and specialisms across the whole of public services. Thanks very much indeed. Have we got any hands in the back half of the hall? Yes, there's a nice stripy shirt right at the back of the hall. Can we get a microphone up there, please? Thank you.
Thank you. Jim Webber, South Norfolk. Listening to what everyone said so far, what I hear is a variety of different themes and policy areas, all of which are pretty well covered in our manifesto and in our policy portfolio. I think one of the overarching themes across all areas of public services over the next 5+ years, given the financial constraints we're under, is going to be efficiency. I don't just mean doing things more cheaply, I mean maybe doing things better for the same amount of money. And very interestingly, we've just heard of the challenges that brings. I mean, I've also got less experience of physician associates, but too often you read about them in the newspapers and you hear about them when you're knocking on the doors with people getting the wrong diagnosis, the wrong treatment, because they've been given jobs they're not trained for, or maybe they're just personally overstepping the mark a little. So I'd like to hear what the panel think about improving efficiency in public services.
Thank you. I'll ask you to come back on that in a minute. Any more in the second? I'll come to you in the front in a minute. Any more in the second half of the back half of the hall? Yes, okay, yeah, please, thank you.
Rochelle Shepherd-Dubay, Woking Borough Council, the lowest funded authority in England. What are you doing to make sure that local councils have adequate funding to take care of everything they have to do, rather than having more councils go 114 and declare bankruptcy? How can you help to do this, to fix this problem?
Thank you very much indeed. I know Lucy will have a lot to say about that. One hand here, please, and then we'll come down to the front, and then we'll move on to the next section, I think. So yes, please, gentlemen. Generally, when you get the microphones,
there we go.
They're magic. You don't need to do anything with them. They're magic.
Perfect. Thank you, Jeremy. The comment I was going to introduce was on education and kind of spin that out broadly into public services more widely. And that's the issue of higher education. And not to revive old ghosts in the party, but higher education is chronically underfunded in this party. As someone who wants to pursue a career in academia, I can't, because there's no funding available to me to get the necessary qualifications to support our institutions that are world-beating and should be world-beating. But also right now we have this situation where if you want to pursue higher education, you have to go through universities. And right now apprenticeships and higher technical qualifications are filed under skills when they are a form of higher education. And I think we as a party need to look at higher education holistically, not just universities, but apprenticeships and higher technical qualifications to revive our manufacturing and public services. Because this is my mind. We have a recruitment and retention crisis in public services. And to my mind, looking at an apprenticeship-style training system, looking at a properly funded system, not just renewing nursing bursaries, but looking at an entirely state-funded system for nursing and doctors, and to think about how we can integrate higher education more holistically in supporting recruitment and retention of public services.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed. And last words to you here down the front. Last one, this area.
Kelly Marie Blundell and from Wealdon. This refers back to the NHS motion this morning and was discussed in the motion to some degree, was the integration of the NHS and social care. And for anyone that's experienced trying to get someone out of hospital and into the social care system will be aware that these bodies don't link up. And it would be extremely useful to have a policy that would then help support that for many people with ageing parents like myself. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed. I'm going to take one more from Richard just there, please, and then we'll come back to you, please.
Yeah. We have talked a lot about social care in relation to health and social care, in relation to reforming social care. I think there's one aspect of social care that I don't think people have actually taken account of, and that is the personal assistant aspect of social care, where disabled people can employ personal assistants to help them live an independent life. I think that type of thing needs to be developed. I'm more than happy to talk to the panel about how that can be done, because it probably will be here forever trying to talk about it. But it's I think that needs to be thought about by the party a lot more than just what you generally consider to be social care.
Yep. Thanks very much indeed. Helena, you're first.
Well, just to say, I think to Kelly, absolutely understand what you're going through at the minute. I've got family who are likewise coming out of hospital, and it's trying to find how they're going to be cared for, it's just it's an absolute priority for us. I think just to talk to Rowan's point, I really liked what you said about not having this hard partition between like higher education and skills, and maybe looking at apprenticeships a bit more broadly. And then your point about higher education and funding, that is a bit of a time bomb at the minute. We know that that's going to be coming up. And then I think it was over here we were talking about efficiency, and the point that you were making about how are we going to be sort of, brave enough to start saying, are we going to look at that in a different way? And I think that's hopefully fundamental to us as Liberals, is that, sometimes it is a money thing, but then sometimes it is about, can we start looking at this from a different angle? So, yeah, I agree with you. I think we can put a bit of a different spin on that.
Thank you. You used the phrase looking at this more broadly, and I hope that might be the motto of this working group, actually. I think looking at, taking all these many examples and trying to be as strategic as we can in response. Lucy.
Thank you. I'm going to come first to the point about professionalisation in health, which I think is an important issue in the health service. As a teacher, it's also something that we've seen the impact of the deprofessionalisation of teaching in the quality of our education system, and that is absolutely not to underestimate or downplay the really, really key importance of people who are not doctors or in the teaching profession, people who are not teachers, nurses, physiotherapists, occupational therapists, care assistants, teaching assistants, all the other people who help in schools. They're all really, really important parts of having a well-functioning system of either health or education. What's really important is that everybody should be clear about what their roles are and what professional qualifications you need to go with those roles. And I think making sure that we've got that clarity is really critical, and it has been blurred in the teaching profession, and I would hate to see that blurring happen in health. Coming up to the issue about efficiency from Jim in Norfolk, there is so much that the previous Conservative government did, and in fact loads of Conservative councils, like the one that I took over from 3.5 years ago, did, which is not just inefficient. I mean, the mismanagement of public funds that has gone on over the past 4 or 5 years is extraordinary. And I think probably every local government leader in the room could give you examples of really, really badly drafted contracts that they've taken over, contracts that weren't monitored, the amount of kind of short-term funding, the vast amounts of effort that went into bidding for money that you then don't have time to spend from central government. It's been catastrophic. So there is a huge amount that can be done by taking a slightly longer term and more strategic approach to an awful lot of spending. So I hope that that is something that will happen sorry, I will hurry up, Jeremy. I won't pick up the points that Eleanor did on personal assistance. I think they play a really, really important role, and I know that there are many, many disabled people who could benefit from that route, and it's an interesting point. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed. If you have we'll move on now from that section. If you have a point you have not been able to make in that, please can I ask you to put it on an email to policy.consultations@libdems.org.uk. I'll give you that again later. But please do, it's an invitation to you all to feed in your views over the next few months to this exercise on an ongoing way as well. Right, we're going on now to boosting economic productivity, and I want to see if I can start around this kind of area. But I see David Howe's hand immediately in the air, so let's try and get a microphone to him, please. Can we do it right in the middle here, in the front section? Thank you. When you get a microphone, everybody, you don't need to try and turn them on or off or anything. They will just magically come on.
Great, thank you. Is this working?
Yes.
Good. It would be very nice for the party to have an economic policy. I chaired a working group in 1989-90, which led to a report called Economics for the Future. That was the last macroeconomic policy document the party has issued, apart from more recent ones that took out chunks of the original policy until there was nothing left. And you might think, well, you know, who needs a macroeconomic policy? We might be the party of Keynes, but you know, who cares? But it does mean that we have nothing to say on some very important items of day-to-day politics. The most important one is the fiscal rule. And it's the fiscal rule that's driving down public expenditure on infrastructure and on capital. The rule we have at the moment is biased against capital spending, leads to short-termism in policy, and we have nothing to say about that. And there are other questions about whether we should be following a rule that's different from the rule followed by the ECB, all sorts of really important issues that we've had nothing to say about for about 25 years. So please, can we have some economic policy?
Thank you, David. That pitch is well understood. I don't think it's quite fair to say that we don't have any macroeconomic policy at all. We have had various formal, but the point you'd like it to have clear front and centre attention is perfectly legitimate. Thank you. Right, there's a hand over there, please. Yes, right in front of the screen. Thank you.
Thank you. Nigel Quinton from Welling Hatfield. And I was actually going to ask a very similar point to David's. We were both in the same fringe at lunchtime on this very same issue. But I want to really just widen that a little bit. I mean, I think what I'd love to see is the Lib Dems embracing donut economics. And it's the sort of thinking that this party used to be famous for, taking a challenging subject and working it and coming up with proper policy as a result. I don't know how many, most people in the room are probably aware of.
Give us a one-sentence summary.
So donut, inside is the level at which everybody ought to be sustained, and the outside of the donut is the level at which the planet can sustain us. We're way beyond the limits on the outside in several issues, not just climate, but many others, and we need to grasp that. It's a very thorny subject. Kate Raworth did a brilliant interview on the Leading podcast with Rory Stewart and Alistair Campbell a few months ago. Well worth listening to. The challenge, the discussion at the end of that was really interesting because both of them recognised post the interview that they had given her a really hard time, but they then went on to recognise that it was the key issue of the day and has to be grasped. No.
That's great. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Very useful points. Any other hands, including for people who weren't apparently at the same pre-meeting at lunchtime for this session? Well, there's some hands. Yes, there's a hand from a lady with a green top there, just up there. We'll come to that just on the back row there, please. Cara, you go first, and then we'll come to the one on the back row, please. Yeah,
Okay, yeah, I wanted to talk about construction skills. We have a really drastic shortage of those. That's going to be needed for new build of homes as well as the retrofit of homes. We've got a shortage of apprenticeships, to the point made earlier, and a lot of people not going on from FE training into construction jobs. So, top issue, I think.
Thank you very much indeed. Lady at the back there.
Economic inactivity mental health issues account for the biggest reason for economic inactivity at the moment, but there is no more funds to put into mental health. How can we resolve this problem?
Thanks very much indeed. A great question. And then could we pass the microphone back a couple of rows? And I can see a hand just Slightly longer row there, thank you. And then we'll come over here somewhere. Hands up here? Right, yes, there's a hand there. A couple of hands there.
Yeah, thanks very much. David Kendall from Brentwood. I'm a small business owner. Had a business for 20 years. I'm an independent owner-operator. There are thousands of us across the UK who operate on our own. The biggest challenge we face is going from one person to two people and doing it legitimately. And that's in terms of PAYE, holidays, pensions, etc., etc. And as a party, we need to get a policy together to help those small businesses to navigate that path, because we could take a lot of people off the unemployment and give them support. The second thing, we need to learn the lessons from COVID and the lack of support there was for limited companies. We got absolutely nothing from this government. A number of small businesses went down. And as a party, we should be championing those people. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed. Gentleman over here, and then we'll come to you in a moment. So, yes, please.
Hello, I'm Avril Jones from Durham. I feel like I'm cheating a bit with this point because it fit quite well into every section, but if we have an ageing population and increasing dependency ratio, what changes do we need to make to the way we think about policy to sustain our policies on social care, to, well, keep people in dignity, when it's the way we're going to have to think about creating growth going to change and change more quickly as the dependency ratio increases faster. And also, how do we test our commitment to devolution of power, which we all like because of empowering of the individual, to see if it's the most efficient distribution of powers to encourage the growth that we need?
Thanks very much indeed. Could the microphone come forward 2 or 3 rows to the guy in the middle, please? Thank you. I'm looking for other hands afterwards, Barney.
Okay. Thank you. Martin Lunnan from Islington, speaking as an individual member. The previous speaker just alluded to the point that I really wanted to make. We have a rapidly aging population at the moment. Very large numbers of people born between 1945 and 1970, not just in this room, but obviously throughout the whole country. That is going to put extreme fiscal pressure on the United Kingdom and indeed on many, many other developed countries over the next 30, 40 years, as those people need state pensions, need extra health care, and need extra social care. There is a limited extent to which, people are talking about more active aging, healthier aging, and that will indeed possibly lead to more people being able to work for longer. Those are partial solutions, but we are going to be in a period of great fiscal stringency, so macroeconomic policy is going to have to recognize that. The one thing I would point out is that a lot of people just say growth. Growth will be our answer. I mean, even while growth is possible without environmental damage, growth will only be part of the answer towards this aging population, because to the extent to which growth implies people getting higher earnings because of a greater productivity and things like that, people who work in health and care will expect some of those higher earnings too, and also under the legislation which increases state pensions, so the state pension bill will also rise in line with higher earnings. So it's not just growth. We need to have more people in the economy, whether due to immigration or encouraging people to work longer as far as possible.
Great, thank you. Mick Taylor, I'm sure I saw you. Let's come to you first, and then next to you.
Yeah. I want to talk about tax. When I was young, probably before most of you were born, the highest tax rate in the country was 98% on income. And people whinged and paid. And now we see all these right-wing papers saying, oh, well, if you tax people terribly highly, they'll all leave. No, they won't. They'll whinge and pay. And I think we have followed hook, line and sinker the nonsense that's been pumped out by neoliberals about the Laffer curve, which I call the laughable curve, which says that if you tax people high, you'll collect less in income. No, you won't. If you tax people high, you'll get more tax. Laffer is a nonsense, and I think since Thatcher, our party has, alas, swallowed a lot of this neoliberal nonsense and is moved far, far away from the party of Joe Grimond, which actually wanted to tax the wealthy, involve the workers, and so on and so forth. So that's my contribution.
Thanks very much indeed. Thank you. It wouldn't be a Liberal Democrat discussion about economics if someone didn't mention the Laffer curve. Right, and Joe Grimond, yes. Lucy.
Thank you. Yes, there's quite a lot in that. I'm going to start with some of the really big questions that were raised over here by Abriel and Martin about our ageing population and the demography of this country, because those are absolutely enormous issues that I'm not sure that very many of the kind of residents of this country have really realised quite how much of an impact that's going to have on our country and our economy in the coming years. Just coming back to the point that Martin raised about healthy people can work for longer, well, maybe we will age better and be healthier, but actually that brings me on to one of the other questions, which was about mental health and how do we support people back into work. There are an awful lot of people who are being broken by the work that they are being asked to do, and that is particularly true in some of our really strained public services. So I think we do need to have a really big debate about what good work looks like, about what kind of work helps people and to live long, healthy lives, and makes them think, actually, I would really like to work well into my 70s, rather than thinking, oh God, how long is it until I can retire? And thinking about how we move from an economy where people enjoy their work and want to carry on doing it, rather than one where people are literally counting the weeks until they can retire, even though it might be decades. That's a big conversation about how we do that. Interestingly, the Federal Policy Committee has a working group at the moment on the future of work, so we'll see if they come up with any of the answers.
And you're welcome to feed into your views
yes,
to that as well.
Absolutely. Some of the other issues on the Laffer curve, I think there are lots of us who agree that some of the stuff that's been said about it is rubbish. I'm not sure. I was involved in a Compass conversation earlier about what you can do that's electorally deliverable, and I'm not entirely sure that a 98% tax would be, but there's definitely a conversation to be had about taxation, and I think Rachel Reeves is going to be starting it in a few weeks' time. I might stop there and hand over to Eleanor.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to start with, I think it was the first comment that we got about, having the economy back on the agenda for the Liberal Democrats. I mean, it was quite literally on the agenda this morning when we were having our topical discussion about Labour's economic policy and the real kind of liberal vision, the alternative that we can provide. And that was really, really refreshing. I'm by no means an economist, but just really enjoying, that challenge to, the fiscal rules and those ideas. It was really, really good to listen to. I really like your point about making work workable and reassessing that. I think it links back into what we were saying earlier, is that when we're not afraid to kind of flip these things on their head a little bit and really sort of reassess it, because there's no other way to approach issues that big, I think. You can't just keep on doing the same thing and wondering why it's not working. And I forget my point for the gentleman over here, I'm afraid. But
you can come back when you remembered it. That's great. Thank you. I'm going to move us on to the next area now, which is the following section will be about international, so we'll hold on to that for the moment, but broaden it into really other areas of domestic policy, which could be anything else you want to say. It could be anything from civil liberties to immigration to welfare to internet safety, a whole load of issues. Let's start with the member in the pink top, will we call that, in the middle of the front row there, please, and then we'll perhaps work back from there. Can we get a microphone right at the front here, please? Thank you. Please, yeah.
Thank you. Eleanor Clifford from Cambridge. As Liberal Democrats, we believe in civil liberties, such as the right to bodily autonomy. But currently in the UK, trans people like me are categorically denied that right. The core problem is not that the NHS waiting lists for trans care are too long, although they are. It's that there are any waiting lists at all. Because starting a hormonal transition is not a medical decision, but an expression of bodily autonomy. We must write new policy to remove all requirements of psychological assessment before trans people can access medical care, and to reclassify hormone therapy as over-the-counter so that when the NHS fails us repeatedly, we can still access the medications we need safely and without, in many cases, risking jail time.
Thanks very much indeed, very concisely put, thank you. Let's move back a bit. So, a brown jacket here, please, thank you. And then we'll come to Simon Hughes, please, after that.
Thank you. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Samuel Jackson from Coverdale. The recent general election was condemned as one of the most disproportionate in British history, which included its record, well, not record low, but it featured one of the lowest voter turnout rates in 21st century history. As Liberal Democrats, we endorse our current political and constitutional reform platform as means of improving the quality of our democracy and thus increasing our voter turnout rate as a means of legitimizing our democracy. I do believe, however, that there may be an entrenched percentage of our electorate who believe that our politics is fundamentally flawed, regardless of possible reform. Should our party consider adopting policies which would allow the unrepresented and those actively discouraged from politics from engaging in politics? These measures may involve a none of the above ballot option, possibly even blank seats in Parliament, similar to something that's been proposed in Spain.
Fine, thank you. That's great, thank you. Big questions there about trust in politics. I'm sure you'll have lots to say about that when we come back in a minute. And Simon Hughes next, please.
Jeremy, thank you very much. Simon Hughes in Southwark. Quick point about electoral systems and then one other. So the first is, I think we ought to, and I'm conscious of the debate about electoral systems tomorrow, I think we ought to give up our policy on multi-member single transferable vote because we'll never get allies to join us in delivering it. I think we need to move to a policy like that which we have for elections for the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Senedd and the London Assembly, which has an AMS system, which has constituencies, ideally on a preferential basis, and then a top-up. I think we could get consensus or agreement sufficient to deliver that, and it will deliver a proportional outcome. And also, it keeps a constituency link, which I think is manageable. If you have that size of constituencies, would never be manageable under STV. Separate point, the debate about banning smoking in beer gardens, I'm summarising it, has shown that the party has not yet worked out the balance between liberty and interference. I'm one of those who would fight for the right to smoke in a beer garden, as opposed to the big brother state telling you you can't, or at least to give you the choice. But I think the party is often tempted to be too prescriptive and less in favour of freedom. And we need to think through how freedom should be much clearer the starting point for us as a party.
Thank you very much. Can any more hands at the back? Yes, perhaps just at the back there, so that we got, keep along there, that's right. And then one behind you as well, thank you.
Thank you very much. I am Bernie Bentic. I'm from Shrewsbury in Shropshire. This morning we heard a very good motion on the NHS and what we as a party can do for that, and a large number of topics were covered. One which was not was the regulation of NHS and care managers. And the background to this is the Winterbourne report of 2010, the Mid Staffordshire report of 2013, the Morecambe Bay report, the East Kent report, and numerous others, including the Clark report on the suitability of the directors fit and proper persons test for NHS directors. And finally, the Messenger report of 2022, which looked at the accountability of managers. And all of these reports recommended increased accountability and bodies that should hold managers to account. So far, the two main parties have ignored this for reasons best known to themselves. And so will the policy committee of the Liberal Democrats now look to promote the establishment of a statutory regulatory body for NHS and care managers with prescripted training, proper appraisal, assessment, a code of practice, and sanctions for non-compliance, as occurs with every other professional group in the NHS?
Thank you. Could go back to the guy with the brown. Can I just say before you start, thank you. You know your history of NHS management reports. I think it's worth saying that the exercise we're talking about now will not get into the level of detail of some of these things, and it will set out a programme and a broad strategic view of where we want to position ourselves as a party in terms of our sort of strategic policy response to what the Labour government is doing. And we will no doubt get to questions like the ones you're talking about, some of the other ones, the very specific regulation questions. But I think the challenge here before us is where do we want to positioning ourselves in the broadest terms? Right, next contribution, please.
Hello, Fareed Al-Dawachi, Lambeth, London Borough. I'll keep it short. Following this summer's riots, how do we promote multiculturalism and stand up to racism and address the concerns of vulnerable people being exploited by the far right? Labour locks people up, but you can't really lock up racism as an idea. So what's the Liberal answer? Thank you.
Thanks very much. Other hands, please. Yes, Alistair.
Yeah. I'm an engineer amongst many other things I do. And one of the things that is deeply worrying to me is the disposable nature of a lot of technology adaptations that's currently going on. I will give you one concrete example, which is the number of disposable battery uses, which are basically throwing away extremely valuable and necessary lithium, which we need for a green energy transition. And they're being thrown away in single-use adaptations, such as single-use vapes. And we are losing tons of that. And we need technology to adopt an approach to technology regulation that requires recycling and reuse, and designing for recycling and reuse.
Thank you. Let's have some comments from the panel, and then we'll come back for another round in a minute. Elle, do you want to go first?
I think I'm going to do it in a bit of a funny order. Yep, absolutely to your point. Hands down agree when it comes to these ideas of disposability. We need to be thinking about it through a lens of circular economy, and we need to have been doing that yesterday. It was Eleanor in the second row. As a Liberal party, and as I think we should be a feminist party, bodily autonomy should underlie, it should be one of our core values. And I think, re your point, some of that's going to be addressed in an upcoming spokesperson paper. So hopefully that may even jump the gun a little bit of this working group. So that's in the pipeline. I wanted to go to the comments about the people who are sort of apolitical or even sort of anti-political these days. There's a huge responsibility, not just for the Liberal Democrats, but I do think that we really punch above our weight with this in rebuilding trust with the British electorate. And the kind of rhetoric that Ed speaks to about offering the politics of, this sort of hope and optimism, like that is just as important as what you're offering in that sense. As reviewing these systems, and I know that we as Liberal Democrats can go around the houses about STV and every single vote system and different offerings, and maybe we do need to go back around. We've been very committed to STV for a long time, and maybe we need to have a little look at that. But it's going hand in hand with rebuilding that wider trust, and I think we've actually hit the ground running after this general election and with this current Parliament. So I think we're on the right track for that.
Perfect. I'll try and pick up some of the others. Sorry. I want to try and link a couple of the questions that I didn't respond to, or we didn't respond to in the previous one about construction skills and one about business support, to Simon Hughes' question about single member votes, to say that I think a number of these issues are things that are already being talked about within mayoral combined authorities. And it's really important that we don't just think about proportional representation as a Westminster issue. Actually thinking about how we increase proportional representation and don't just have first past the post in elections that are not just for Westminster constituencies, I think is a really key way forward and actually probably a more possible option during this Parliament than banging our heads against the brick wall of a Westminster change. I mean, maybe I'll be proved wrong, maybe changes at Westminster will happen, but we used to have second preferences for mayoral combined authority elections. We should really be pushing to have that back and to make sure, and the more that we can get multi-party politics across local government and regional government, the more Westminster will look like a weird outlier that we need to change. Coming on, to the NHS, there are huge issues about accountability in the NHS. Management is part of it, but it's only part of it. As somebody trying to deal with lack of accountability for our ICB, it's unbelievably frustrating. And it's not, I'm sure it will be part of the conversation about what happens next for the NHS. I hope it will have a big enough role, because accountability is really important and it's very, very absent. And finally, on multiculturalism and racism, that is such a huge topic, and I think it's the conversation that politicians from many parties need to have with our population about how we prevent ourselves from being divided from each other by the narrative of the far right is something that I think is incredibly important, and that this party needs to think really carefully about, along with lots of other parties. Thank you.
Thank you. That's really useful. We'll take some more comments now, maybe from this area. Really useful, fantastic range of things there to take forward. So, as you know, Lucy, accountability of the NHS is one of the things I talk about every time I open my mouth about the NHS. Right. There's a chap in a grey sweatshirt right in the middle there, please. Could the microphone go to him first, please?
Hi, I'm Timmy from Greenwich. With 1 in 50 homeless in London, including me, temporary accommodation hurting the finances of councils, and cities like London more dense than ever, I think it's time we talk about the green belt and house building itself and what counts as affordable. Much of the green belt around cities are low quality patches of grass with low biodiversity that could be used to build housing with biodiverse gardens. We build too much luxury housing, as it's done by greedy developers instead of councils that we could help, like developers, to seek investment for social housing in addition to government money. I think setting a better formal definition for what's affordable is also urgently needed. But finally, restricting people to rent for their entire lives by removing the right to buy a council home, which is what Labour plans to do, means families in relative poverty like mine will be locked out of home ownership forever. It's wrong, it's unfair, and I thought fairness is something we stand for in the Lib Dems.
Fantastic, thank you. The guy just next to you, please, with a black T-shirt. Thank you.
Oh yeah, just want to say, I think you can build loads of houses, but if someone can own them all, then that doesn't really solve the problems. I'm thinking about a tax on ownership of multiple properties. Might be a way forward.
Thank you. Can we bring the microphone right round to the front here, please? Thank you. If you pass it. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. I was also going to talk about the housing crisis that many of us face. I always wanted, attached to the housing crisis, how do we spread prosperity around the UK and give people the opportunity to live and work where they want to live, and how do we stop the brain drain from certain parts of the country and kind of make sure that all of the wealth and opportunities isn't concentrated in small pockets across the country and people have access to opportunities everywhere. And I know some of the policy working groups have touched on this before, but it would be lovely to see that brought forward. But no, thank you.
Thank you. And then at the back of the group there, please. Try again.
Keir Starmer
seems to be coming and going. Try keep going.
Keir Starmer has initiated reforms of the House of Lords, and he's echoed Gordon Brown's comments about a chamber of the nations and regions, which, as you know, is basically a sort of federal senate, although he's too nesh to use the F word. Now, as you know, Lucy and I were on the working group that made, for me, a very important incremental step in the structural issues of our constitutional policies. Now, we don't know how fast things might change in the next Parliament on the House of Lords issue. So I think in order to have our policies coherent and to keep moving forward, our next incremental step should really be, as a background task, to more clearly define what sort of Senate our replacement to Lords would be. It may not be pressing, but we don't know how fast things will move, and it would be useful just for things to be tied together in that fashion. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any more hands in this section? Right, in the whole section behind up there, please. There's 2 or 3 hands. Yeah, why not start with the lady standing right at the back there, please? Oh, you've got a microphone already,
Yeah,
brilliant.
yeah.
Good.
I wanted to talk about political reform. In addition to what people have already said about proportional representation, there's a number of things Tories did that we could reverse. I'm talking about voter ID, but then there's also things like the funding of electoral campaigns and politicians telling lies deliberately, even if they get called out, the lies out there. So that sort of thing, I think, could be reformed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then some more hands in the next group along. Yes, there. Go over the, yeah. Any of those hands there. Thank you.
Yeah, 2 points. First, from the housing debate, I think what's been left out of that is rentals and how we look after people who are already in rental accommodation that can't afford that because of private landlords. And the second thing is to do with supply-side economics. We really have to get rid of this idea that supply-side economics is an intellectual validity, and we should look to nationalise water and energy, because you cannot have a market in natural monopolies.
Thank you. Let's have a couple more hands up there, and then I'll come back to the panel. So where's the microphone? Yes, great.
Adam Robertson, East Suffolk. My concern is about the Quality Act, because there's nothing enshrined to get rid of it. And I work for a local principal authority, and some of us with special protected characteristics are concerned of a potential group being elected next year who don't agree with the Quality Act. One of my friends, she's LGBT. She's gone to the EDI department, and there's nothing they can do about if these councillors get elected during their training. And we're scared that this group, the new nasty party, the Reform Party, are going to stigmatise people like myself who have got Asperger's, people who are LGBT, and even the fact that the Equality Act also includes the Equal Pay Act. Now, what can we do to push the government to ensure that all councillors get the training, but also to put the Equality Act on sort of a special levelling? Because I'm concerned, and I know some people can't sleep at night at the moment within Norfolk County Council.
Thank you very much indeed. Could you pass the lady, and then behind you, a couple of rows behind you. Thank you.
Frances Nella from Chesham and Amersham. I'd like some consideration given to our position on free ports and special enterprise zones. I think there's some areas of great concern that we should be looking at. And linked with that, the disappearance of monies into tax havens and offshore accounts. The scandal of PPE is going to show that really that money should now be in the HMRC coffers and not floating somewhere offshore.
Thank you. Francis, in a couple of sentences, what would you do about free ports?
I think we need to look long and hard about whether we actually need them. whether they're actually going to add to the economic well-being and benefit of the country. I think there's lots of rights and issues that could be lost on the back of that. I think issues around trade union, job opportunities, planning. There's a lot of things that we don't really know, and I'm very concerned that a lot of them are being developed in secret or not transparent, let's say.
Thank you very much. Could you pass it back a couple of rows, please, to the guy there? Thank you. Then I'll come to you.
I'm Matt Horrocks from Folkestone. I don't have all the answers to this. I'm not sure anybody does really, but the advent of AI is going to make significant changes to our economy, the shape of the economy, jobs, and also social impacts like misinformation and so on. And I think we really need to get into the myriad implications of AI, quantum computing and so on, and develop work those into our policy platforms.
Thanks very much. I'm coming to you too now. On AI, FPC has a policy working group at the moment looking at the whole area of science and innovation, including AI. And I encourage you to feed in your views to that we will hopefully bring to conference sometime next year. So please feed in your views on that. I'll give you the email address again for that and all of them. Policy.consultations, with an S at the end, policy.consultations@libdems.org.uk. Right, Lucy, you're going to go first.
Thank you. I'm going to start with the questions about homelessness, home ownership, tax on multiple properties, the housing crisis, spreading prosperity, and rental protections. I mean, there was a whole collection of questions there about what we do about the absolute mess that is the housing crisis in this country, that is entirely tied up with the way in which we tax and treat property, and all of the kind of there've been decades of rigging the tax system in this country to make sure that house prices never fall. And also everyone can kind of squirrel lots of money away in various different kinds of property. I'm not going to go into how it would be possible to deal with those things, but I'm quite sure it will be something that Eleanor's group have to look at, and that we as a party have to think about during the next Parliament. I am also absolutely certain that it is right at the top of the Labour government's agenda, and looking at what they do about it will need to be something that we are paying attention to. That slightly brings me on to Michael's question about Lords reform and the new Conference of Nations and Regions, and what's going on in the mayoral devolution space. Actually, the things that are happening in terms of mayoral devolution in England are moving quite quickly, and again, we are going to need as a party to change our policy in response to what is being done, and the changes in that area are happening quite fast. There was a letter out this week saying that the government have rejected the devolution deals in Norfolk and Suffolk that had previously been drawn up, and talking about kind of alternative models that they might be interested in. So there are things happening quite quickly that we're going to need to be responding to. I think kind of political reform is slightly in that space as well, because actually when those other changes happen, political reform will happen. But in terms of reversing voter ID and electoral funding, we definitely need to look at the way in which politics is funded in this country. It is so broken and so open to abuse. I don't think the current system is particularly in Labour's favour, but they might currently think it is, and that's the problem. So we will need to try and keep that on the agenda. I'm going to hand over at that point because I've lost where I was in my notes.
It's absolutely fine. My notes are a little bit shorter on this one. Thank you to the young Liberals for in the audience. I know Chloe, I know Timmy. Housing has been an issue since I got involved in politics, and it's not going away anytime soon. I think when we've approached this previously, there have been some really sort of like refreshing little elements. I remember when we, in the last housing debate, about the abolition of leasehold. And, like you said, it's a huge system. It's a mess. But there are some like real like glints in there that really make me quite hopeful that when we approach this, because like I said, we may have had a policy paper like previously, but it's still going to be something that is going to be very relevant because it's so high up on Labour's agenda, and we have to, hold them to account and make sure that we're scrutinising it as they tackle that. I have a lot of hope that with the right kind of levels of consultation, which is I think what all of this is about, that we can really make some leaps forward on that. I just wanted to thank you for your point about free ports. Wasn't on my bingo card for this session, I won't lie, but I feel like I'm going to go away and have a little read about it now.
Thank you very much. And
can I just pick up Adam's point, having found my note again? Adam, I understand your concerns about the Equality Act. I do fear that reform are going to make it a topic, but I also think that it is something that will be strongly defended, not only by this party, but also almost certainly by Labour. While there is, it's one of these areas where I think that there's a real need to make sure that we don't let the national debate get drawn in a particular direction. So we will keep working on it, but thank you for raising it.
Thank you. We're going to go on now to the last of our 4 sections, which is international. Can I see any hands from anyone who would like to? I've neglected this part a little bit, so should we start with a guy with a beard, please, in a sort of bluish short-sleeve shirt there, please? Thank you.
One of the subjects that, I'm Bob Vance from Mull Valley. One of the subjects that has been absent from this conversation is the one that I consider one of the greatest threats to liberal democracy in the Western world, which is migration. We really cannot leave the right to use the snake oil of the easy answer to deal with the migration issue. We need to be upfront and talking about it and come with constructive suggestions to deal with migration. Thank you.
Thanks, that's really clear. Thank you. Yes, at the back there, please.
Thank you. It's Jonathan Brown from Chichester. We can see Biden's slow rolling of aid to Ukraine, I think following other policy decisions around Syria and so on. The point I want to make is that I think Western countries have forgotten that we are in a confrontation, we are being challenged by anti-democratic regimes. And I'm not calling for war, I'm calling for us to understand that we are under attack, and when there are opportunities like Ukraine, that we should want Ukraine to win, not merely to survive, not merely to end the war. We should want democracies to win, and we should help them win when we are forced to do so. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed. Thank you. And there's a hand here. Yes, the guy, another one with a beard. The beard section.
Thank you. Ollie Henman, Bath and North East Somerset. In 2015, the Lib Dems were a key party calling for the Sustainable Development Goals. But of course, we've seen huge kind of step backs under the Tories, and the recent UN report said only about 15% are on target. So what can we do to revitalise the SDGs? And a few ideas that I would put in the mix. I mean, I think we as a party have always been calling for the 0.7% to be reinstated on GDP, but also the quality of aid, making sure that it reaches local people, that it doesn't just stay in the hands of big corporate providers, that actually aid reaches local communities. And then finally, sort of thinking ahead, I think we've got to start thinking even beyond 2030. So what does the next cycle look like, and how do we link climate and development, as Ed said earlier? Thank you.
Thank you. And I will just say that during the course of writing the manifesto, which we just published, actually we spent quite a lot of time talking about the SDGs and how various elements in that take forward various. Keith Melton deserves a very honourable mention at this point. Right. Yes, please, at the back there again.
Jack Bell from Edinburgh North East and Leith. Forgot about that bit. But as the previous person said, how democracies are under threat worldwide, one country I haven't heard much about, and I'd like to see a Liberal Democrat friends of this country group, and that is Taiwan. I keep hearing a lot about how China wants to invade Taiwan and how they see Taiwan as a breakaway province. So does this party have any policy on Taiwan?
Thank you. And how about over here? Yes, please. Just keep going.
Okay, there we go. Thank you. Rupert Potter, North Cotswolds. 3 strategic things. Europe, I presume, will be front and centre of anything on our international relations in terms of ensuring we develop and build out our relationship with Europe. Democracy has been touched on, fully endorsed. I think we should be working with other democracies, particularly to support those where democracy is under challenge, whether it's through conflict or internally. And the third one, which hasn't been touched on, is best practice, and that brings together the other aspects of the policy discussion we've already had. Around the world, there are lots of good sources of best practice for domestic policies where we could be using our network better to try and learn what's already being done well and that we can adopt. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Yes, please, over there. And then we'll come do some at the front maybe after that.
Matt McLaren, Enfield. I think connected with our international policy, we should be thinking a lot about security and defence policy. Obviously, we're all aware that this is a fast-changing and more dangerous world. But particularly, this party hasn't always, certainly since the days of Paddy Ashton anyway, had a lot to say on defence. And if we're going to hold our seats in traditional true blue areas and challenge for the remaining Conservative seats, we should definitely be a party of strong national defence. Now, that doesn't just mean, carte blanche spending, buying everything and new aircraft carriers that are expensive and inefficient, but thinking strategically about how we can maximise, as a country, our position in the world, particularly working with our European partners, and use our strong defence capabilities to leverage a close relationship with Europe, because between us and France, basically, we are the superpowers within the European continent on defence. So I'd like to see the Liberal Democrats be very vocal about defence and echoing some of the ideas that were mentioned yesterday in the excellent Defence and Veterans group with our new MPs.
Thank you. How about over here? Do we have any hands over here? Not at the moment. Okay, yes? Yeah.
Thank you. I think we need to think about I think what will be the increasing importance of soft power, such as the BBC World Service and the British.
Good. BBC World Service and British Council was mentioned. Right, could we get a microphone just in this? Could you maybe come around and bring your microphone around to the middle group here? There's a couple of hands. Should we start right at the back, please, there? And I'll come forward to you, Joe. All right, we'll start with you. We'll start with Joe, then fine, we'll get back. That's fine. Okay.
Thank you. I mean, other speakers have touched on this, but are we on the cusp of an existential struggle for the future of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law? And if we survive that, then do we come out with democracy, human rights, the rule of law being in some sense more robust? And what does that mean? And can we think about designing that? And obviously, people have touched on the military angle of that. Obviously, we've got extremes of left and right and others in democracies working to undermine, and we've got the whole information space, which is a brand new challenge. So I think there are 3 strands to it. Are we prepared to look at our institutions, see how we can improve, and look at obviously our international posture as well? Thank you.
Thanks very much. And at the back there, please.
Kevin Langford, Kingston. 2 things. One, picking up on what the gentleman over here said, I think it'd be very useful for FPC to put some resource into looking at what's worked elsewhere, because most of the West is facing similar problems to us. Secondly, on international and climate change, I think it's quite likely that the attack from the right at the next election will be the UK shouldn't be doing this unilaterally. And so having a strong story about how what we are doing fits into an international context on climate change, I think is very important.
Thank you. I think we've got time for about 3 more hands or so. Yes, so let's start up here, please.
Oh, hello. It's Matt from South London. Just a quick idea. Do we think about maybe a closer cooperation with Europe about building something like an Airbus, but it's more on defense? UK has BAE, which is one of the foremost weapon company in the world, but it's very rare we talk about have a closer development of defense system, especially combined with AI and new algorithm and drone technology. So I would like to see the party have more bold policy on this, because so far it's more like Band 8 policy that we could see.
Thank you. Any more hands? Right, yes, over here. Okay, fine. Shall we start at the front here, then could we have one right at the back there, please? Yes, this guy. where was that? Okay, yes, yeah, fine. And then the lady in the row behind you, please.
Hi, Andy Fulsham, Oxford West and Abingdon. To my mind, one of the biggest risks to our international standing and indeed security at home is the way that there is misinformation very much weaponized by hostile nation states, or for that matter, excess ego billionaires. I'm thinking particularly of Elon Musk in the recent civil war is inevitable comments during the riots. I think we need some regulation.
Thank you. And the lady just in the row behind there, please.
Hi, Fazana Aslam from Farnham and Borden. I want to touch upon children. A couple of things that particularly concern me, being a mother of both a boy and a girl. One is the level of gender violence and misogyny that is prevalent amongst children in our society. And the other is the exposure that they get to incredibly harmful images and content that doesn't appear to have any censorship. So I'm in my car with my children listening to Capital Radio, and I have to constantly turn the channel. I now listen to Gold, and I think I'm really old-fashioned. But because the lyrics are so disturbingly violent, it glamorizes drugs, so we wonder why there are kids on our street corners wanting to be part of what they perceive to be, a pathway to success. So censorship is one thing. The other is the fact that, when I was growing up, it didn't cost much to do things like go to a library or go to a local community centre. Where are the spaces for our young children if they have no money?
Thank you very much. And I saw a hand right at the back there. Is it still there again? Yes, please. The guy right, yes. Could someone just take a microphone to him, please? Thank you. And then you, I think, will be our last contributor before I come to the panel.
Oh, no.
Thank you. I just wanted to roll back to the thing on proportional representation in the last section. A gentleman down there was talking about abandoning STV and going to a mixed system like in Scotland. The Liberal Democrats are signed up to the Good Systems Agreement, which gives us the flexibility to accept one of three systems, the STV, the Scottish system, or there's another one that escapes me for the moment. So we already have the flexibility to do that. The Conservatives signed up, a Conservative pressure group has signed it, a Labour pressure group has signed it, but the Liberal Democrats signed up as a party. Okay, that's all I wanted to say, really.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Any comments? We've broadened a bit from international stuff there, but there's a range of topics to respond to there, please.
Yeah, no, just to start, I think very broadly with the international issues that we were talking about with Ukraine and migration. Luckily, I think these are things that Liberals have just been historically very good at. And I think we've got an excellent foundation to start with, and obviously it's an incredibly challenging situation that we're facing at the minute. But I think I feel quite confident that we have got a great place to start with there, not least when we were talking about defence, we were saying we've got some excellent MPs who are, veterans. I think that's, it's very exciting, we can really hold our own in with those conversations. I've got sprawling notes here, so you're going to have to bear with me. Mention the BBC World Service over here. Yeah, I think that's an absolutely high-value quality service. We've got absolutely... forgive me for 2 seconds. I'm struggling to read my own handwriting. Oh, yeah, absolutely agree with the points you were talking about supporting places where democracy is under threat and that kind of transfer of best practice. I really like the way you described that. And then just to go, I know it wasn't quite on the international topic, but your comments about sort of children's spaces and where they can go, and the one thing that we certainly can't risk is the being pushed even further into this sort of online space, because that to me when I'm dealing with sort of youth politics, it's a completely different landscape to what a lot of people you can even understand. Even me, I'm 26, and I'm seeing young people, and they're just dealing with such a different. It's Wild West in comparison to what I had, and yeah, it's absolutely something to deal with. So sorry that it's slightly off the international topic, but
thank you, Lucy.
Thank you. I don't think it's that far off the international topic, actually, because I do think that there was several questions about whether democracy is under threat and whether the West has really paid enough attention to the fact that we are under attack. And it's really important to think that that attack is not just about the actual bombs that are falling in Ukraine, but it is the constant attack, cyber attacks, internet attacks, use of the freedom of the internet in the West to spread misinformation and to divide us from each other. And I think the West is slowly waking up to that, and probably the West is the wrong term, but free democracies, whatever term you want to use. I don't think we are anything like aware enough about how much our freedoms of speech, our freedoms of assembly, all those things are being used against us by other countries which don't have that. And I think that we need to pay attention to that, and it will be a big topic over the next couple of years. Just on the issue of migration, I think that's part of the same conversation, actually. We need to not allow those in the right-wing press, who are often funded by people outside this country, to set the narrative on that. Actually, we have all benefited enormously from the spread of ideas, the spread of creativity, sharing scientific and technological advance. We have to talk about that as part of the benefit of a world where people can move for work and education. And that topic, again, is something that I think we need to make sure that our party is leading on. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Lucy. Thank you all very much for contributing your ideas and being part of this discussion. I think there's very little very few policy areas that have been raised this afternoon that we don't have some policy on already, even including free ports. But we do find ourselves in new circumstances now, and it's been really, really helpful to get your input on what should be the priorities and what should be the steers for how we start to balance some of the trade-offs and the tensions that came up in the various points made there. So thank you very much indeed for that. I want to thank very much Eleanor and Lucy. I also want to thank the policy staff who have been taking very diligent and possibly even slightly more readable than Eleanor's notes from all of this, and that will be fed into the discussion. And most of all, I want to thank very much indeed the stewards who have done their best to cope with me dotting around the hall and running microphones everywhere. So thank you all very much indeed, and we'll now move on to the next session.
Hello, conference. We now move to an addition to our agenda, F21A, speech by Magen Inon. Please make your way to your seats quickly, safely, and quietly. It is a pleasure to be able to introduce Magen, and it's fair to say that the events of the last 12 months have been absolutely horrific, but from the sadness have come some silver linings, and me meeting Magen is certainly one of them. We first met at a vigil outside of Downing Street where we lit candles in honor of those who have died to remind ourselves that from darkness there can be light. And he was there to tell the story of how both of his parents were murdered by Hamas on October the 7th. And he did that standing alongside a Palestinian friend of ours called Hamza. It is an honor that he has come to share his story and his message to our conference. Liberal Democrats, please give a warm welcome to my friend and fellow educator, Magen Inon.
There's a nice big clock here, so I won't speak too much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Leila, for the invitation, and some other familiar faces I see here. For not just the invitation in the introduction, but also the support and friendship over the last year, which was the most difficult in my life. I'll start with what I think is the most important thing, which is we should all be doing everything we can to stop the war, bring the hostages back home, and so that no more innocent lives are lost in the conflict. Okay. Sadly, it is already too late for my parents. On October 7th, both my parents were murdered by Hamas terrorists who attacked their village in the southern part of Israel. We pray that they did not suffer in their last moments, and the only consolation I have is that they died together, inseparable in life and death. We miss them so much. Leila mentioned that we're both educators, and I'll stay with the theme of education today. We actually taught at the same school, even though not at the same time. I'm sure it would have been great. But being a teacher, even though I'm not teaching anymore, being a teacher is very much part of my identity, and that's my perspective on many things in life, and even on what happened on October 7th and since. When Hamas attacked my home village and other villages in the surrounding area, they knew that they would not be able to hold those villages for a long time. Their horrendous attack was a cruel attempt to send a message. They were trying to teach the Israeli population that Israelis should not expect anything from Gaza, anything from Palestinians, apart from more and more violence. And so the message is that Jews living in Israel should leave. This is the long-term strategy of Hamas. Israel's actions in Gaza over the last year, on orders from the far-right Israeli government, are also no longer aimed at the safety and security of Israelis. If anything, the ongoing war in Gaza risks the lives of the hostages that are still in Gaza. Instead, the Israeli government is attempting to teach the residents of Gaza that they should not expect anything from the Israeli government apart from more violence. And so they should leave, or at least never attempt to attack Israel again. This is the long-term strategy of the current Israeli government. In many ways, this has been the nature of the conflict for decades. Each side is trying to use violence to teach the other side that they should give up. The result is that every iteration is more violent, and the lesson hasn't been learned by anyone. We who advocate for peace are often called naive, but thinking that if you just hit someone harder, they will finally get it, they will finally give up, is pure insanity. It is time we face reality. There are roughly 7 million Jewish Israelis and roughly 7 million Palestinians between the river and the sea, and no one is going away. Menachem Begin, who was both the first right-wing prime minister of Israel and the first to sign a peace treaty, said, "War is avoidable, but peace is inevitable. At some point in the future, just like the French and the Germans, the English and the Scots, Gunners and Spurs fans, there will be an end to the violence between Israelis and Palestinians. The question is, how long will it take us to get there? Will we get there? Will our kids get there? Will our grandkids get there?" The pain and trauma of both sides are very real, and we must recognize that. It is hard for many to imagine a shared future. As an Israeli, it is especially hard as long as hostages are still held in Gaza. But over the past year, I've realized that a shared future based on respecting human values, such as security, freedom, equality, and dignity, is already the present-day experience of many. It is not a far-off future. Among many others, I've met Hamza Awaude, a Palestinian peace activist from Ramallah, who has become a true friend. With Hamza, I not only share a vision for the future, we are actually creating a shared present in which our 7-year-old boys, Adam and Taher, are not hateful, are not afraid of one another, and can just play football together. It was also the way of life for my parents and my siblings, who had and have friends, colleagues, and partners from many diverse backgrounds, including the Bedouin and Palestinian communities, both those who are Israeli citizens and those from the Palestinian territories. And although it's been a very tense year for many here in the UK, it is also the way of life for me and my family. My kids have friends from the Jewish community, the very different Muslim communities, Christian communities, and many, many diverse backgrounds that I would struggle to name them all. The question we need to ask ourselves is not how do we make the vision of a shared life possible in the future. It is possible. We see it everywhere. The question is how do we grow and create more and more spaces of that reality? And maybe you want to call those spaces liberal democratic spaces. In education, when you have a so-called difficult child, you look for the grain of good in that child and try to grow that grain so that it becomes a much larger part of that child's being. This is what we need in both the Israeli and Palestinian communities. Look for the grain of light and help it grow. Yesterday, hundreds of thousands of Israelis were marching the streets calling for a deal, calling for an end to the war, for the hostages to be brought back home. We need to support those Israelis who are marching in the streets. Similarly, there are Palestinians who are advocating for peace, who are advocating for a non-violent diplomatic process between Israel and Palestine. We need to support those voices in the Palestinian community. So for you, what should the largest Lib Dem parliamentary party in history do? Okay, I'll start with the sticks. The UK government can lead the way in supporting international law proceedings in the ICC and ICJ, alongside increasing sanctions on the delusional and religious fanatics on both sides. And please get in touch if you want some more details. Unfortunately, some of those individuals are in leadership positions, but they should be sanctioned as well. This is true both in Gaza and Jerusalem. Alongside that, the UK should lead its G7 partners and others in supporting civil society peace building on the ground. The UK is a long-standing cross-party supporter of civil society peace building in Israel and Palestine. It can take a much larger role, and you should hold the government to account on that. Alongside efforts to change reality in Israel and Palestine, you have the power and responsibility to address tensions within communities here in the UK, in your constituencies, schools, universities, and elsewhere, and grow and create those liberal democratic spaces where people feel secure and safe and belong. My daughter will be 5 soon. She just started reception. Recently, she asked my wife if we can show her artwork to Grandma and Grandpa when we next visit them. But then she said, oh, but they died. Then she asked my wife, can we fix Grandma and Grandpa? Can we fix them so they're okay again? Through her tears, my wife explained why that is something we cannot do. When my wife told me about this conversation with my daughter, I immediately started crying. No, we cannot fix Grandma and Grandpa. But my next thought was that there is something we can fix. How amazing would it be if in 10, 20, or 40 years' time, we would be able to tell my daughter, we are sorry we couldn't fix Grandpa and Grandma, and you have to see them only in photos and videos. But we were able to make the world a better place for you to grow up in, so that your own children do not have to grow in fear. It would require us to work hard, step by step, to achieve this. But this is our duty, and myself and others are working hard to move in that direction every day. Please join us for ourselves and for our children. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you to Megan. Thank you to Nick DaCosta, my aide. I now hand over to John Ball for F22 to F28. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Yeah, if you're making your way in or out, please do so quickly so that we can carry on with the next session. Good afternoon, conference, and welcome to F22, a small but perfectly formed debate on the membership subscription and federal levy. The motion starts on page 33 of the agenda. There are no amendments. Will Christina Nowell please stand by? And I now call Mike Cox, the party treasurer, to move the motion.
Thank you, John. Thank you, conference. I'm delighted to see an increased attendance from last year. So obviously last year went well. And I'm glad it went well because there's absolutely no change from the motion last year apart from a few little tweaks. The motion put forward in the agenda is a really steady as she goes motion with little or absolutely no changes. The election was fantastically successful in so many fronts, but financially less so. So 2024 and 2025 will be financially transitional years for the party. We will need to move from effectively reliance on our reserves, which we have done for the last number of years, to being sustainable on a year-by-year basis. There is really, at this point in time, the financial effects of having 72 MPs, beg your pardon, nearly increased us, is quite substantial, and we need to work out the financial effects of those. And so this is really no time to change the fundamentals. So as I said, this is really a steady as she goes, pretty much the same as last year. And so I would recommend the motion and for you to accept the motion as put forward in the papers. So thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Will Mark Pack please stand by? And I now call Christina Nowell from Brent, who will speak for the motion.
Hello, conference. I would like to speak in favour of this motion because of our liberal values. It would be a betrayal of them if we were to raise our rates in the middle of a cost of living crisis. As we have highlighted, there are many people who cannot afford to pay more than they currently are, and so raising our rates would exclude these people and raise the barrier of entry. I am fortunate enough that I am supported by my parents as LGBTQ+. There are many people who are not, and therefore will be financially cut off from any of those benefits. I am fortunate enough that I can say that I am supported and financially stable enough to retain my membership easily. There are those who cannot and are instead waiting on checks from the government and benefits to be able to continue being afloat. While we do have a lowered benefits entry for membership, we unfortunately cannot raise those because if we were to, people who are on benefits and cannot afford for more would be unable and would be excluded from our party. There are many people who may not have access to even the internet to be able to vote today, and so I would want to be able to speak for people who cannot attend and for people who cannot vote, to be able to say that I urge you to vote for the motion in its entirety to be able to help those who have been disadvantaged. I have a friend who is unable to pay some things because benefits are, well, we all know that the Labour government has not kept with consistent benefits. They are inconsistent, they are not on time, and they don't come whenever you need them to. If we were to raise our rates as Labour has, as the Tories have, then we would be unable to have as large of a party as we do. Currently, the Labour government for 1 year, it would be £68.52. For the Tories, I believe it is £36. We are proud to be able to have a low rate of it only being £15 for an adult to be able to have it for the entire year. I urge you to vote for the motion in its entirety, and thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Finally, I call Mark Pack, our party president, who will summate for the motion.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Christina, for reminding us of the human face behind financial decisions. And I think that's something that is crucial for us to always remember, that accounts and accountancy and financial-related decisions may sometimes seem a somewhat dry and abstract matter, but the decisions are ones that influence individuals. Other than that, though, I think I should quit while I'm ahead, as there has been no opposition so far to this motion, and simply urge you to vote for it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. I received no cards against, so we now move straight to a single vote on this motion, which you can take part in here or online. This requires a simple majority. Can I see those in favour of the motion? And can I see those against? I can't see any at all. Yep, and the same is true online. So that is clearly carried. So now we now move straight on to the party reports session. So we're going to hear the chairs of 6 party bodies introducing their reports and answering questions from members. This covers agenda items F23 to F28. The reports are in a separate reports booklet in the conference documents section of the app. The questions start on page 7 of today's conference daily. And as we did last year, we'll take the votes on all the reports together at the end of the session. All this information is also available online via the conference papers link on the Lib Dem conference live page. So will questioners please stand by at the intervention mic if they wish to ask brief supplementary questions. And I now call Mark Pack, the President of the Liberal Democrats, back on the stage to move the report of the Federal Board.
Thank you, John. It is a very pleasant contrast thinking back to when I first presented a federal board report as your president after the 2019 election. Back then, we only had 15 MPs. Now, of course, we have the fantastic tally of, and I'm looking at Mike here, 72 MPs. But also, maybe even more importantly, we have more than 800 extra councillors than we did back then. And we now have a Liberal Democrat majority on more councils than when we went into coalition in 2010. And progress like that has been accompanied by, I think, welcome steps, not enough, but welcome steps on improving our diversity. The list of Lib Dem council leaders is not only larger, but it's no longer an all-white cast. Our parliamentary party has a record number of MPs from ethnic minority backgrounds. There is certainly more to do, much more to do, but I think it is fair to say that we start this Westminster parliamentary cycle in such a stronger position. Now, the main task really for the board, for your board, since the general election has been to start work on updating our strategy and our financial plans for this new parliament. And it's important as we do so that we involve all parts of the party, because there are some significant new challenges that we face. There is the wonderful challenge of supporting our 72 new MPs in firmly embedding themselves as local champions in their communities. There is the intriguing challenge that we have done so well at turning second places into firsts that it's definitely a bit of a shortage of second places, and how we help people build up from third and fourth is going to be an important challenge. We need to continue that local government growth. We need to take the new opportunities in the devolved elections coming up with the new electoral system in Wales and the very changed political landscape in Scotland. And we need to build our party more broadly, our member and volunteer base, and to continue to improve our diversity, not because it is some nice add-on, but because fundamentally more diverse organisations are more successful, and we absolutely want to be more successful. But the best way to do that will be to build on the lessons that we can learn from the general election, because just because it was a success doesn't mean everything we did we got right. We absolutely need to learn the lessons. So as you will have hopefully seen from your agenda, there is a general election review session tomorrow morning, and the board set up the general election review over the summer. There are more details about its remit, timing, membership in the written board report, but I hope also you will all participate in that session tomorrow and in the other opportunities to come. Now, without prejudging that review's findings, I think it's fair to say that central to our success were three particular principles. One was focusing most on the issues that voters tell us are most important to them. The second is promoting to the electorate really effective local champions. And the third was working relentlessly to win under the electoral system in front of us. And although we are in a very different political environment, and how we best implement those principles will necessarily be different in this environment, I think those three basic principles will continue to serve us very well. Now, on more technical matters, you'll be glad to know I have no changes to our complaints process to report to you this time. But I would like to say a huge thanks to all the volunteers and staff involved in running that process, especially during the high stress of the general election. That went remarkably smoothly, and that is a really impressive achievement for them all. I'd also like to personally thank my three fellow board officers, Jenny, Jeremy and Amna, who have been massively supportive in all of the pressures since the last conference. All the other board members, of course, have been particularly helpful as well, but my three fellow officers especially. And then finally, as you will have seen, hopefully, from the conference paperwork, the board is putting to you for confirmation the name of a proposed new member of the Federal Appeals Panel. This is to fill a casual vacancy. We advertised this publicly. We had 13 applications. 4 of them were interviewed, and as a result, we're recommending Rebecca Williams to you for confirmation, and details about her are in Conference Daily and in the conference paperwork. And with that, I'd like to move the report.
Thank you, Mark. Now can you please... Yeah. Very popular. Now can you please answer the first question, which is question 1 from Leon Devine, relating to a particular stall in the exhibition?
Yeah, so Thank you for the question, Leon. And thank you also to Federal Conference Committee for accepting this as a late question, as I know it is an issue on people's minds at this conference, and I share many of your frustrations about it. The context for this question is that the Conference Committee decided to decline a stall to a group of party members who are not an official party body and who strongly oppose some of the party's stances. However, the party's legal advice, including from a specialist in discrimination law, and considering all the points raised at FCC in favour of its decision, was that this would be illegal, and so we would, at great cost, lose any resulting court case. To simplify the legal situation greatly, the issue is that we are required by law to be consistent in how we handle views that are protected under equality law with how we handle other views. I find it personally very frustrating the law does not give us greater scope to make political judgments over what we would want to happen at our events. But alas, the law is not as we would wish. So we could choose, for example, to ban any standard conference which in any way disagreed with party policy, but that would require us to ban stalls such as those from Young Liberals, to name just one group that has on occasion disagreed with the party's policy and has done so with some success as well. We really wouldn't want to have to go down that route. And I know that people, including on FCC, have therefore hoped that we could think about concepts such as values rather than policies, and so find a way to distinguish between those we might wish to have here and others. But I'm afraid the consistent legal response to those different attempts has been that it would be illegal to refuse the group that FCC wished to turn down. As I said, I regret that, and alas, I think we do need to acknowledge that when the legal advice is clear, the appropriate course of action is to follow that legal advice, which is why our Finance Committee Chair did in declining to authorise the cost of refusing the stall. On a couple of points of detail in the question, as it mentions the party's official associated organisations, we have charged commercial rates for the stall that has prompted your question, Leon, because they are not an AO and did not get AO rates. I'm sorry that I know you and others will find this situation unhappy. We are, though, planning to have a debate on the policy that they disagree with at our spring conference. I hope and expect that the whole party will take that very clear opportunity to express where the overwhelming majority of you is in the party, which is our strong support for trans rights and for our trans and non-binary colleagues. They are the ones who truly represent us.
Yes, thank you. Would you like to ask a supplementary, Leon?
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Fine.
on there.
And thanks very much for me to FCC and for allowing this question. When you're talking about the legal advice that was given, was also thought given to the fact is that some members might feel that conference had been made unsafe and might think about taking legal action against the party on the grounds of being discriminated against by allowing that stall, and how was that affecting the legal advice? And also, how well was that legal advice tested? Because I've spoken to a number of lawyers who've said that as this is a private event, a purely party event, we should have the right not to allow people in who don't agree with us. Our values, not just our policies.
Yeah. So I guess the short answer, Leon, is yes, all of those points were considered. And it is several different lawyers at different times who have given advice on this. But for example, the most recent advice came from a barrister specialising in discrimination law, and obviously happy to talk to you in more detail about the sort of the specifics of what you raised. But fundamentally, because, and I use the example, apologies to Young Liberals, but Young Liberals as an example, because we do allow into our events people who do disagree with some of our existing stances, that's the bit that then causes the problem in terms of what equality law does and doesn't permit. And you are right, and I'm sorry, I regret that, as you say, there will be some people who feel unhappy and potentially unsafe as well at this event as a result. And I think I'd just like to pay huge thanks to Nick and Federal Conference Committee and the stewards team for all the additional steps they have taken, working with, I know, plus Liberal Democrats and Liberal Democrat women to try to ensure that the right the right protection, the right communication, the right contact details, etc., available to ameliorate the fallout from that.
Thank you, Mark. Please, can you now answer question 2, which was submitted by Adam Robertson, and relates to being able to react quickly to political developments?
I mean, the board, both in terms of its own composition and things we were responsible for, oversaw very significant changes in the last Parliament. I mean, for pretty much 30 plus years, people had always been saying in the party, the board and its predecessor was too large, and it just carried on getting larger. And we, or rather you, conference, finally bit the bullet in the last Parliament and replaced that with a sensibly sized board that can really do the job well on your behalf. And that was one of only many, very many improvements we made to how the party is structured and run, including also, for example, making the role of Vice President responsible for BAME affairs a full voting member of the board. There are definitely lots of new challenges to come in this Parliament. I think it's probably fair to say that at the moment we really need to some extent wait to hear what the General Election Review concludes, because those lessons should be absolutely central to whatever plans we have for future strategy, future structures, etc. But I definitely think that we showed through the evolution of our approach in the general election, as our prospects got remarkably more positive and bigger through the election, an ability to move swiftly, and I'm confident that the whole sort of staff and volunteer team would be able to move as quickly and as effectively if there are dramatic events in British politics.
Adam, would you like to ask a supplementary?
Thanks for that, Mark. Obviously, there's another leadership election, what will finish on the 2nd of November. Now, if that said party decide to elect someone from the constitutional nationalist right, so they're on their right, obviously they could see that types like Alicia Kearns and that decide to have a reverse SDP, sort of a Christian Democrat, progressive Democrats like Ireland. Now, in that situation, they'd be basically next door to us in terms of the political space. And as you probably know, under first past the post, it's going to be brutal. And obviously, we would need to consider how we go on those lines. But is that something what the party is now sort of actively considering?
I mean, I think one of the lessons from 2019 and Change UK and so on is that we should have confidence in our own position and our own potential power in British politics. And we are, in fact, in an even stronger position now than we were in 2019. Many more MPs, third party in the House of Commons, many councillors. As with any events in politics, we always should be open to potentially welcoming people who have sincerely changed their views and have an overlap now in what they believe and what we believe. But I think fundamentally, our route to success is by building up our own strength, by communicating even more clearly what we stand for, and by winning people over to think, I want to vote Liberal Democrat on that ballot paper.
Thank you, Mark. So next we have question 3, which was submitted by Ulysses Abbat, about harmonising national, devolved, regional, local campaigns.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is absolutely spot on, because all 4 national, devolved, regional, and local campaigns should be pieces of the same puzzle, and our success in each of them should feed into the other. And I say should because I don't, as the question I think touches on, we've not always been as good at that as we should do. I think we've got better, but again, definitely more to do. And I think the answer to it is, in a way, 2 parts. There's the top-down part, about making sure that as we develop our strategy in this Parliament, as we develop our financial plans, as we develop our new staffing structures and so on, to make sure that we do that in as fully integrated a way as possible, so that it is one team and one plan working across all of those different electoral challenges. But there is also a bottom-up sort of grassroots element of that, which is one of the reasons why we've not always made the most of how those different levels of elections can fit together, is members and local parties and activists' levels of motivation across those elections vary hugely. And so I think we have a real challenge there at supporting, encouraging, training, more people to see all four of those levels of elections as part of the same piece. And just because it's an election at a different level where you think our chance of winning might be lower, not to therefore think, okay, this is an election we can sit out, but to still see how campaigning in that election can make a real difference. And I appreciate that means, in some ways, asking people to do more. So part of that is definitely how do we help grow a larger supporter base? How do we support people to campaign in each set of elections rather than sitting back from some? But absolutely, I think the question is spot on that that's how we achieve more success in the longer term.
Thank you, Mark. Doesn't look like we have a supplementary to that, but can you now go on to question 4, which was submitted by Janet Grauberg about engaging local parties in developing a new strategy?
Yeah, I mean, this, as I sort of touched on in the board report, this is absolutely at the sort of top of the board's list of things we need to get right and we need to be starting to work on soon. And in doing so, I think it's useful to learn from what has and hasn't worked so well about our strategies in the past. And essentially, the old style, as it were, very much was we would have one huge, lengthy process with a consultation session at conference, and then at following conference, a big motion, a long debate, lots of amendments, etc. Motion would be passed, then put on the shelf, and everyone forget about it pretty much. And so what we tried to do differently, and I think partly got right in the last Parliament, was having a much more, seeing it as a much more ongoing process, that the strategy is, as it were, something that you do. It's not something that you have one debate and then have. It's an ongoing process. And so what the board has said we want to do for this Parliament is not replicate that traditional process, but actually come back to you to conference more regularly through this Parliament with updates on what our strategy is and how it is evolving. So it's an ongoing process, which also, therefore, is hopefully a process that local parties, regional state parties and council groups and so on will all find it much easier to engage with.
Janet, would you like to ask a supplementary?
Thank you. Yes. So my question is, I'm a former secretary of an AO and a former local party chair. We meet infrequently. We are trying to do other things, such as win elections and formulate policy for conference. But please, can you, when you're doing this sort of new continuous process, think about the time frames that will allow all of these organisations to be involved?
Absolutely. And also, I think we should bear in mind that the many new opportunities that Zoom, frankly, has provided for us. You know, it is one of the tiny little slivers of a silver lining from the COVID epidemic is how used to even the less IT literate, amongst us have got to using Zoom. And that makes it possible to involve people in a way that previously would have been just too cumbersome or expensive. So absolutely. Expect many emails from me, Janet, inviting you to Zoom calls.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Said with enthusiasm, I note.
Right. So I think we'll just have time for one more, sort of set of questions, really. So there were 3 questions, question 5, 6 and 7, all submitted by Jim Williams and all relating to political strategy. If you could sort of address them together, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's try and give one answer that sort of covers all 3. So I think part of the answer to the different circumstances that we're in and the possible changes in the political landscape is that relentless focus on incumbency and making sure our 72 MPs are all firmly bedded into their constituencies, because that's the sort of starting point, that's the bedrock. There is an open question, and to some extent we can try to influence this, but to a significant extent it's out of our control, of how popular will the Labour government be and how unpopular will the next Conservative Party leader will be. And the relative performance of both of those, we will definitely be trying to influence through a lot of our canvassing and delivery and so on, but it's to some extent an external thing that we will then have to adapt to. And so that's why I think the continued focus on our local government base is so important. Important in its own right for changing people's lives, but also the broader the local government base, the better placed we will be to be flexible in response to that changing political environment. And so if it turns out that we have huge prospects against Labour, we need to have that local government base. But if it turns out we're, say, on a much more defensive pattern at the next election, we also really need that local government base to help support and hold on to what we had. So incumbency, local government, and of course, making the absolute most of the new additional opportunities for national media coverage that we've seen with the very large number of journalists who are maybe not in the hall, but at least at conference, a very stark difference to previous conferences.
Would you like to ask a supplementary, Jim?
No, thank you very much. Having been greedy enough to ask 3 questions, I don't think I'll ask a supplementary, but thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Good. Those are all the questions we have time for relating to the Federal Board, and the rest will receive written responses. I'm going to take all the votes on all these reports as a whole together at the end of the session, so thank you, Mark. So we're now going to move to F24, the report of the Campaign for Gender Balance, and I call Councillor Julia Cambridge, Chair of the Campaign for Gender Balance, to move her report.
Thanks, John. So CGB was expecting a relatively quiet run-up to the autumn conference, but the unexpected general election put pay to that. But we are so pleased that the Liberal Democrat Parliamentary Party now has 44% women members of Parliament, a total 32 out of 72. Even more good news, our co-vice chair, Vicky Slade, has been elected to Westminster. Our previous co-vice chair here at Campaign for Gender Balance, Anna Sabine, has also been elected as an MP. And CGB has records of contact with at least 18 of the 22 newly elected members of Parliament who are women, and all of the previously elected 10 women. We're delighted that every one of the 32 women elected has shown that women candidates are winners. We're proud that CGB training, coaching and mentoring has contributed in some way to their successful journey to Westminster. We recognise that our task is not yet done. We're in contact with some excellent women who didn't win this time, but they will have a good chance next time, but there's not enough of them. We pointed out in our last report to conference about the impact of the COVID pandemic on the pipeline of women on their way to stand in Parliament. The pandemic depleted the numbers of women coming forward to stand for local government, the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Assembly, and ultimately to Westminster. We're therefore redoubling our efforts to find, inspire and support the next generation of women to stand at all levels for public office. Sort of following on a bit from what Mark was saying, in line with the party's strategy, CGB is an intersectional organisation supporting all women candidates who come forward for training, mentoring and coaching. We've co-opted Kelly Marie Blundell, a long-time CGB supporter, to work with us in these new endeavours. And I know Kelly Marie, like Vicky, like Anna, will bring so much enthusiasm and experience to our offer. We aim to continue our successful model of delivering a Future Women MPs weekend, a training that many of our new MPs have attended, along with delivering women-only training at this conference. Any woman applying for candidate approval has the opportunity to link with a CGB officer for mentor training. And finally, we'd like to congratulate Baroness Caroline Pidgeon in her new role in the Lords. Caroline has been passionate about boosting women's representation throughout her distinguished political career and has been a great help to CGB. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. So we now turn to questions. Could you answer question 1, please, submitted by Christopher Johnson about opportunities and challenges?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Christopher. Okay, so we're talking about opportunities. We all got a shock on the 22nd of May This was a quick election in terms of the timetable, so that was the first challenge. Candidates had booked holidays, were still raising funds, were still gathering vital data and running campaigns. Then suddenly we had a general election date. Another of the many challenges was just the weight of support that women needed, which at times meant that CGB mentors and the core team were working flat out. But opportunities you asked about, opportunities included the learnings that new mentors could get from supporting women at the most hectic and pressurised of times.
Thank you. Would you like to ask a supplementary, Christopher?
Yes. Reducing our female proportion below 50% entitles us to use all women shortlists for the next election. Do you think this is a good way of increasing gender balance? And if so, how would you recommend selections implement them?
Okay, you've got to forgive me because I haven't totally heard all of that. So you were talking about reaching 50% representation and how to go about it?
No, I was saying we've dropped below 50%, so we now qualify for all women shortlists.
Correct.
Do you think these are a good way of ensuring gender balance? And if so, how would you recommend selections implement them?
Okay, so we've got to understand there, Christopher, that we had a target seat programme, and it was really about, although we far exceeded it, obviously, it's about women in viable seats. And again, some of the ones that weren't expected to be won were won. But what I would say is the task is really about a change of culture, let's say. There's particular challenges in regions, and we need to keep combating that. We need to keep educating. We need to get women in front of people speaking. We've got a fantastic opportunity. 44% is obviously lower than our former parliamentary party, where it exceeded 50%. I don't see that as a failure, though. I think we've got things to work for. There's going to be parliamentary by-elections coming up. We have a fantastic record with the Sarahs and many more, and you know, in our by-elections. So that's not necessarily going to stick there for the whole parliamentary term.
Thank you. So we now turn to question 2, submitted by Ulisi Abat, which is about supporting the mental health of those on, it's not really a committee, but yes.
Thank you. So first of all, I want to say it's an important topic, which CGB recognises as an area where it's important for us to link up and signpost for help. Be vigilant for signs of anxiety and stress, and always keep areas of communication open between us and women, often when they're doing a very difficult, isolating and mentally exhausting job. You ask about the committee. Just to say, Campaign for Gender Balance isn't a committee system. We have 3 officers, a chair and 2 vice chairs, and we work extremely closely together, and I hope we're self-supporting. Thank you.
Great, thanks. So that's all the questions that we have time for on your report. As I say, all the votes will be at the end. So thank you very much, Julia.
Thank you.
And we now move to F25, the report of the Federal Communications and Elections Committee. So I call Baroness Pinnock, Chair of the Federal Communications and Elections Committee, to move her report.
Thank you very much, John. So a long report, as you might imagine. So let's just start by saying it's been an exceptional and a year for our party. And I'm going to split it into 2. One, thinking about the local elections, which are really important, as Mark has emphasised, and then about the general election, just to show how FCEC got involved. So first of all, about the local election. So the great news is this was the 6th year in a row that Liberal Democrats made gains in local elections in England. And that matches the best ever winning run of gains in local elections. So I'm looking forward to next year being able to say it was the 7th winning run in a row. So those of you fighting county councils elections, it's up to you. We now have 3,100 Liberal Democrat councillors. 68 councillors are currently led by Liberal Democrats, either outright control or with agreement with other parties. So that is a wonderful opportunity for them to be able to put their liberal values into action locally. One of the downsides of this, and one in which FCEC did a lot of work, was that approximately 1/3 of wards that were up for election had no Liberal Democrat candidate. And one of the challenges that we will have in the next year is to try and increase that number in order to everybody can have the opportunity to vote Liberal Democrat. Do excuse me. I've done too much talk in this conference, and the voice is disappearing. So that is a big challenge, and it depends on people here and members who are not able to come to do their utmost to find candidates in every ward so that everyone has a chance to vote Lib Dem. So that's the local elections, which is mainly a great story. Thanks very much. Moving to the general election, a strange thing happens for FCEC when at a general election is that they no longer are in operation. And I am, as chair of FCEC, take over as chair of the general election campaign, which was a wonderful opportunity, and I must be the luckiest chair ever. Great timing by somebody. Anyway, so what was enormously sort of to reflect back that literally the minute that the election was called, everything was in place for running a very, very smooth, successful campaign. Obviously, as you've heard from Mark, there was a clear strategy, which we stuck to, though it was flexible enough to change as situations demanded. There was meticulous planning and meticulous preparation for the campaign. As many of you know, in people's offices, garages, wherever, they had a stack of Flying Start leaflets ready to go. So the day the election was called, those were out on the streets. That was hugely impressive. So there was everything had been planned, and I can't tell you how enormously impressive sight it was when I went into HQ the day after to see that everybody, every team was in their place, had all the equipment they needed, and was on the case. Fantastic. So there's two elements of the FCEC taken oversight of. Obviously the campaign team, but also the communications and media teams. And I have to say that the air war this time complemented absolutely the ground war. And that hasn't always happened. So my job as chair was really to just to see, challenge where necessary, what decisions were being made, to prevent groupthink, which was outlined in the Thornhill report after the last election. And finally, there's no resting on our laurels, folks. The trouble with politics, it's always looking to the next. And our task is to maintain and increase our elected presence in every part of the country and at every level in the country, because Liberal Democrat values are needed as never before.
Thank you, Kath. So now I'd like to, if your voice is holding up, I'd like you to address question 1 from Karen Lindsay, please, which relates to the Scottish and Welsh elections.
Yes. Thanks, Karen. I don't know if you're in the room, very much for this question, because it's really important. So in the state elections in Wales and Scotland present now a huge opportunity for the party nationally, but also in those two nations. They're different because they're both under proportional representation, so there are different skills needed. Now, what has been really good is that the federal campaign team put a lot of effort into both Wales and Scotland at this last general election in order to retain initially and then increase our presence. So with 6 MPs in Scotland and 1 in Wales, that was a successful outcome. And the campaign director, Dave McCobb, knows full well that it's really important that we build on that success in those elections. And both Scotland and Wales have a very senior campaign manager already in place, already thinking and planning for those elections. So I hope that's given you the assurance that you need that there will be plenty of support for Wales and Scottish campaigners in those elections.
Thank you, Kath. Yes, Karen isn't here to ask a supplementary, so we'll move on to question 2, which was submitted by Adam Robertson, and it's asking whether special measures could be considered to help places like Suffolk.
I was wondering, Chair, if I could answer question 11 alongside, simply because they're very similar. Is that okay? And
yes, that's fine. That's fine from John Grant.
And then that actually gives, you know, more people get their questions answered.
Yeah, so if John Grant stands by to respond if he wants to do a supplementary as well. Thanks.
So both the questions are about local elections where the party is facing challenging circumstances, in a nutshell. And I absolutely understand the concerns expressed by both the questioners about the challenges you face in elections. I live in West Yorkshire, which is Labour facing, and it's been tough since 2010, and remains to be tough. I'm hoping the Labour government make more decisions about winter fuel allowance and council tax for single person discounts, and that will give us an opportunity. So part of the answer has to be that nationally the party puts, and I'm expressing this quite carefully, more emphasis on revitalising activity in those areas. As you heard from Mark, you know, our primary objective has got to be hold what we've got and expand where those targets are easier. But we have got to focus on those parts of the country where Liberal Democrats have done their bit by helping our target seats to win, and now need a bit of TLC to get them going again. So you can't have the resources not available to help in every place, And I think what I would say, in a bit of a challenge back, that it's part of the responsibility of the teams on the ground to show that they're got an ambition to win by campaigning in those places. And then there, I'm sure, will be some help provided to increase their campaigning capacity.
Thank you, Kath. So Adam, would you like to ask a supplementary?
Yeah, so Suffolk has, in the last 3 county elections, gone backwards every time, which is quite concerning. And I get what you're saying, Kath, but if that board overseeing it is sort of maladministrated, how can you do that? Because there has been issues in Suffolk. It's like dealing with a barrel of badges with prominent individuals who have different ideas and lead to maladministration, basically leading to, in parts of Suffolk, no campaigning. So how can the party help to get Suffolk more professionalised and sort of making sure we've got a presence? Because at the moment it's frankly dysfunctional.
Well, first of all, I'm really sorry to hear that an important place like Suffolk has fallen into the situation that you describe. You know, the best way to counter that is get a bunch of leaflets, go out and start knocking on doors. Find a team of people who want to make a difference by electing Liberal Democrats and just get going. Don't wait for an organisational change, because that takes forever. Just get out and campaign. Talk to people, find what the issues are, and then get your focus out. That's the best way. That's the answer to seats that appear to be not willing to do the campaigning.
Thanks. And John Grout, would you like to ask a supplementary to your question?
Thanks, John. One of the challenges that we found, so for context, I'm from Reading, and we spent a lot of time in the election helping in Wokingham and in neighbouring seats like Newbury as well. And what we found was quite close to the election time, even when places like Wokingham were starting to feel very good, certainly for feedback from our canvassers, we were being told, go to Wokingham, you need to go and help in Wokingham, it's looking really close. And actually they ended up winning by thousands and thousands of a majority. And with a little bit more nuance on the targeting advice, it's possible we would have been able to help get another couple of places either over the line or into a better second place than we ended up getting. So my question about that, you know, the support for the local parties isn't just about the support we need to advance, but also the support that we can give neighbouring parties, making sure that's better utilised so that we play the game with first past the post even better and minimise the number of seats where we rack up astronomical majorities and lose in other neighbouring seats by a tiny amount. So I don't know if you want to comment on that at all.
So, your question, I mean, let's go back to where you said you were asked to go to Woking to help out. And that was obviously the right thing to do. And nobody knew at the time how well we were going to do. I can tell you that the canvass data across the country generally moved more positively in our favour in the last couple of weeks. So it was quite right to really focus on those places that we were going to win at the general election. Now, what we have to do now is to, if at all possible, is to pivot to those places, particularly those that are adjacent to constituencies that now have got an MP, a Liberal Democrat MP, because the love will spread. And I think that answers your question, John. Yeah.
Thanks very much. So that's all the time we've got for this report.
I've got loads of questions here.
Sorry to disappoint. So
I want to answer them all.
I'm afraid you'll have to give written responses to the rest.
This is about elections. No?
I'm sure they are, but sorry about that, Kath.
That is no good, is it? Demand more time. Thanks very much.
Right. So, yes, so despite a bit of protest, we now move to F26, the report of the Federal International Relations Committee, and I call David Chalmers, the chair of that committee, to move his report.
Good afternoon, Conference. I'd like to move the report from the Federal International Relations Committee. Those that you've read it in the last 6 months, we obviously as well were very much involved with the general election. But also we had the European elections over in Europe. And one of the things that we did manage to do with our relations and connections with our sister parties was that in the same way as we had been very much involved with the policy on Europe and developing a closer relationship with Europe, we managed to include in the Audi manifesto a similar response from our sister parties that they also want to develop a closer relationship with the UK and also develop foreign policy and security policy, so cooperation on those. So that was actually, it was not an easy task. We had to really work behind the scenes, lobbying, working with sister parties. And I think it just, again, I think the message you've heard in the party here over the last few days, that we are really going to have to work closely to make sure that from the European perspective that they are which efforts we can do to actually achieve that sort of aim. So that's been one of the really big areas that we've been working on. Going forward, the next couple of weeks, I shall be leading the delegation to Lisbon, where we have nominated Baroness Sal Brinton for re-election. There are 6 candidates for 5 places, and as I think I've explained in the past, there's been a change now in the voting within ALDE, in that the non-EU parties are not allowed to exceed 1/3 of the votes. So our delegation to the Council is now at 38, and to the Council is 8, and to the Congress is 38. And that is something which is a result of Brexit, that they have sort of delivered that the non-EU parties are not allowed to have more than 1/3. We're also not allowed to nominate a candidate. We're not allowed to have the presidency, but we are hopeful that Sal Brinton will be re-elected as the Vice President. On Liberal International, we recently held an election for the new representative alongside myself to Liberal International, and Irina von Wiese, my colleague, was successful in being elected to that position. And we will be nominating candidates for the Vice Presidency and to the Human Rights, Climate Justice and Fair Trade Committees of Liberal International, which will be elected at the meeting of Liberal International in Santiago in Chile in November. So that's what we've been doing very much. I mean, I think the election is really exciting for us because it will mean that we actually have the resources to be able to do things. We'll be working more with the Westminster Foundation as the third party. All of that is going to be looking towards the future, but at the moment we've been, I would say, sort of holding a sort of steady course. I know there are some questions that have come in. Would you like me to answer those?
Yes. So if you could first answer question 1 from Adam Robertson about the cordon sanitaire.
Yes, so this is actually an element, something which has come up very much within ALDE at the moment, and it is how our sister parties are actually engaging with parties on the far right. There is no answer to this at the moment. I mean, so the VVD, our sister party in the Netherlands, actually went into coalition government with the far right. They've sort of managed to keep themselves there. You know, it's not ideal. If you were there in ALDE, you will see that we need to actually develop a process whereby, so when it happened in Sweden, a delegation was sent to Sweden to actually report back from ALDE to us. When it happened in the Netherlands, probably because of the size of the VVD and their influence, it was decided not quite to do that. I stood up and actually said, this is not right. We actually need to make sure that we're treating all the parties in the same way. And I think it's something which is going to become more of a problem across Europe. We have shown the way that actually by standing up for our values and not giving in, not going into coalition, not being swayed by the far right and populists, and we've been successful. So hopefully this is actually going to be a way of leading now within Europe. But I would say that there are, I mean, you look at the FDP in some ways have been adopting policies which we would actually challenge. And I think it's going to be something which is going to be a real challenge for Liberal parties across Europe going forward. But as I said, because of what we've done, and we've actually shown an example of the way forward on this, I think it's, we can be proud of that. So, yeah.
Thank you, David. Adam, would you like to ask a supplementary to that?
Yeah, because I think we're going to be coming to that in the UK, if I'm honest, with the Reform Party. And I'm particularly worried at the next county council elections that Reform will certainly have a massive presence on the county councils. So how have the Liberal parties in Europe have sort of distinguished between radical right and the moderate centre right? Because there may be circumstances where we may have to go into coalition with the Conservatives in certain county councils, especially along the eastern seaboard, to stop Reform getting in. So how have they distinguished between who's centre-right and who's the radical right as such?
Well, in many cases they haven't. And if you take the case of ANO, which was our sister party in the Czech Republic, they actually started in the European elections, they adopted policies what I would call far right, anti-immigration. They started putting out really sort of nasty rhetoric. So when we had a meeting in Vilnius of ALDE, just in the middle of the election back in June, we were prepared to say, should this party really still remain in ALDE? And they resigned. So they resigned from ALDE rather than, I think, being sort of kicked out. Others have, so I said the VVD ended up going into coalition with the far right. That happened with Liberalerna up in Sweden. Others are trying to sort of keep a cordon, so it's cordon sanitaire, and saying we want nothing to do with them. There's no sort of consistency, and in some cases, parties are actually trying to. My concern is where our Liberal parties don't actually stand up for our liberal values and really challenge these, but think that by adopting some of the more right-wing policies that they can, and then to me it's like, they're no longer, where are you, where's the liberalism in this? And in Germany at the moment, I think there's a bit of a problem there. The FDP, our sister party, has fallen down to 1% in the polls. I was over there last week, and there was no liberal voice challenging the anti-immigration, send people to Rwanda that was being put forward in Germany. And I think that's where I say we here actually can show an example and lead in Europe that we challenge them, and we haven't actually allowed our values to sort of be diminished in that respect.
Thank you, David. I'm afraid we don't have time for the other questions.
Sorry,
about that.
I'll do a written for those ones, yeah.
Yeah, so written for those, yeah.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much, David.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
So we now move to F27, the report of the Federal Council. So I call Councillor Anthony Hook, who's Chair of Federal Council, to move his report.
Thanks, John. Thank you very much, Conference. As a written report, so I'll be very brief in moving. As it sets out in the report, the FC's role is to scrutinise the Federal Board. It has 40 members elected from various components of the party membership, and Conference has given the Council power to call in and overturn decisions of the Federal Board if it wishes to do so. There's a high bar. It requires 26 of the 40 to vote to overturn a decision, and that's not 2/3 of those present, it's 26 in all circumstances. Since the spring conference, we called in one decision. It takes 13 to initiate a call-in, and we called in the decision to cancel conference. Here we are, isn't it good? I can't claim the credit for the reversal of that decision. That decision was, of course, taken in the context of anticipating an autumn election, and when Rishi Sunak called an early summer election, of course, conference was reinstated, and we will never know how the Federal Council would have voted on whether this conference took place. FC members receive, usually the day after every board meeting, all of the decisions made, and actually we receive all of the papers that go to the federal board. I think roughly around the same time the board members receive those. The 40 members read all the papers, then read the decision notices, and then we have 5 days to decide whether to call something in. Very few decisions have attracted 13 requests to call in, but we frequently do have the president or other senior officers of the party come to our meetings to exchange views and hopefully influence future decisions and the way things are implemented. The Federal Council members include PPCs, councillors and many other people with great responsibilities, and they take on their role on the council alongside all of those things. And just finally, we are of course on the council absolutely delighted by the general election results and the fruits that the strategy bore of 72 MPs.
Thank you, Anthony. Could you answer the question, please, from Abriel Joram?
Sorry, I didn't hear that, John.
Sorry, could you answer question 1, please, from
Yes.
Abriel Joram about the mechanisms the Federal Council uses?
Thanks, John. So the question is what other mechanisms we have. Well, call-in's the primary mechanism, and it's important to understand, I think there is sometimes confusion about this, if we call something in, it doesn't signify that we disagree with the decision. It means that we want to have a bit of a look at the issue, and we can call in and overturn, or we can call in and make comments and not overturn. But of course, as I said a few moments ago, even if we don't call something in, we can invite the President or other officers to us for a discussion about any particular issue. And we can also, as well as looking at decisions, we can also look ahead proactively. And we've indicated to the President that we want to have a look at membership retention and recruitment, technology, and the conduct of certain legal cases.
Thank you. Yes, so Abriel, would you like to ask a supplementary, please?
Just a short one. The only clarification I'd like is that largely done as a group, or do individual federal council members reach out to the officers, to the people on the board, etc.?
Yes, it's a group exercise. So usually members will indicate to me or to I've got 2 vice chairs as well, to me directly, or we have a WhatsApp group and a Slack group, which is more important, that something's on their mind. There'll sometimes be some discussion among the members through those channels, and then I'll contact usually the President and we'll discuss who can come along to talk about the particular issue.
Thank you. So now could you answer question 2 from Christopher Johnson, which is the opportunities and challenges?
Yes, I think the question is what opportunities and challenges we had since the last general election. Well, the FC had and took the opportunity in the run-up to the election to give comments and input into the general election strategy well in advance of the summer election. And we were also ready in case the general election created a need for us to do some additional work. A hung parliament never looked particularly likely on the poll ratings at the start of the election, but we know that things could change, and if there is a hung parliament, the federal board can be called upon to make some important decisions, and we had a date set aside right from the very beginning for the council to have a special meeting, if needs be, to scrutinise any decisions the board might make. We're certainly looking forward to seeing how the board develops strategy in light of the quite transformed political circumstances the country is in, and we'll play our part in scrutinising that and hopefully adding value.
Thank you, Anthony. I'm afraid we don't have time for the other questions to be done verbally. So thank you, and we're now going to move to F28, which is the report of the Federal Appeals Panel. So I'd like to call David Graham, the chair of the Federal Appeals Panel, to move his report.
Good afternoon, conference. Formally, I would beg to move the approval of the Federal Appeals Panel report. We have reported in writing, which is the report's found at page 49 of the pack. Just in terms of who we are and what we do, we are a fairly obscure body to many members. We're set up under Article 22 of the Federal Party Constitution. There are 18 members, or there should be 18 members of our panel, of whom 9 are directly appointed by the Federal Party, and I'm delighted to welcome Rebecca Williams to the team following this conference, and 9 are appointed or elected by each of the state parties. So that's how we get up to 18. The purpose of our panel is to adjudicate disputes that fall under headings that are set out at Article 22.3 of the Federal Constitution, and chiefly these are disputes about the interpretation of the Constitution and any claim that the rights under the Constitution of any members, any affiliated organisations or any organ of the Federal Party has been infringed. And there's some other categories of jurisdiction as well. So we, in some cases, have appeals against decisions of returning officers at elections. So what we do is very important because we're here to safeguard the rights of all members, regardless of what their beliefs are, of which particular groupings within the party that they may belong to. And we're here to ensure, first of all, that conferences' decisions on how it's set out the powers of the different bodies and organisations are actually applied and followed by all the subsidiary bodies of the Federal Party. And secondly, we are here to ensure that all members are treated fairly and that, for instance, if there's an issue about has someone received due process or due consideration, we look at and we review the approach that's been taken by party bodies. So that's what we do. We've set out in the report the cases that have been decided since the last report, and one of those concerned the interpretation of the party constitution, and in terms of what was required by way of reports to members from the Federal Audit and Scrutiny Committee. And we found that the minutes that were being produced but not published didn't comply with what conference had said is required of federal committees, which is that they publish reports. So that gives an idea of what we do. If it is helpful, Chair, I hope I can turn to answer some of the questions.
Yes, exactly. So if you can you answer question 1 from Christopher Johnson about opportunities and challenges, please?
Yes, so just in terms of the question, we're not a committee as such. We have panellists and we convene a panel if we need to hold a hearing to determine a dispute. But in terms of what are the biggest opportunities and challenges, the biggest challenges, frankly, has been getting through the caseload because we're under strength. We don't have a full complement of personnel, and in particular, we haven't at the moment got any appointees from Wales. So we're under strength, and that poses difficulties, therefore, in getting through the caseload. And of course, the general election itself, which is referred to in the question, inevitably delayed some of the matters that we were having to decide because, quite rightly, members want to campaign for those elections, and therefore some of our non-urgent work has to be postponed as a result. I hope that answers the question. Is there any
Christopher, would you like to ask us?
Yes, if you're under strength, what are you going to do to encourage recruitment, especially, as you say, in Wales?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we as a body, we're not responsible for, we don't determine our own makeup. So we rely on the federal executive to search for, and which they have done, advertise for applicants for membership. And in respect to the state parties, each of them has a different system. So for instance, the English party, if you're on the English appeals panel, you're ex officio seconded onto our panel. So we are reliant on the state parties. I have expressed personal views in some of the reports that we may need to look at changing the way that we're constituted to ensure that we do have a sufficient pool of members. But circumstances can arise where the Constitution says that we're not quorate to hear a dispute unless we've got a certain number of members from a particular state. So it can arise that we can't proceed to hear a dispute unless we've got a member from a particular state. So that's something to look at.
Thank you, David. Can you now answer questions 2 and 3 together, which both relate to the power of exclusion from conference?
Yes. So just in respect of that, what I understand these 2 questions to relate to is a decision that was taken by a case panel of the Federal Appeals Panel last Saturday. The reasons for that are reduced to writing, and then there's a process whereby any person who, the parties are invited to make representations as to whether any redactions need to be made before that decision is to be published. And they get 7 days for that. And the reasons were signed off by all the members of the panel on Friday. So one of the questions is, why was it not published? That's because that time hasn't expired. But questions 2 and 3, unsurprisingly, given that this decision has not been published, don't necessarily don't appear to be aware of what the findings were. In that case. So I think if it's helpful, I can say that behind the scenes, we've spoken to the parties and we've had agreement that I can summarise what that case was about to address the concerns that have been raised. So effectively, what that was about was last autumn conference at the Glee Club, there was an incident with a particular member at which the member concerned wrestled the shoe off of somebody, and that shoe allegedly was thrown at, or in any event landed on, another individual at the event. What then happened was, the following morning, after this individual had sobered up, they were asked to leave by one of the stewards, which they did. A couple of days after conference had closed, they then got an email from the chief steward stating in the passive voice that a decision has been taken that they be banned from attending 2 subsequent conferences. So that would have been last spring conference and this conference that we're at today. They then asked to appeal that decision, which was then appealed to the Federal Conference Committee, which sat, I think it was from memory, the 15th of October last year, and considered the appeal and dismissed the appeal, and they then came to us. So what we have ruled is that first of all, that the chief stewards did not have a power to prospectively ban, as a disciplinary sanction, a member from attending future conferences. There is a disciplinary process that the party has, which is set up under Article 23 of the Constitution, and that article says that you shall follow that process when a complaint is made, and it isn't for an individual chief steward to effectively set themselves up as a disciplinary process, or for the Federal Conference Committee to be adjudicating on what are really disciplinary complaints. And then in addition, we found that the process that was followed by the committee was extremely unfair. And in particular, the respondent to the allegations was not given a chance to see the opposing case, to see the evidence against him, to make representations at the hearing. The people who were hearing the appeal were the same people, or some of the same people, who had made the original decision. So on a number of grounds, it wasn't a fair process. So the answer is, if a circumstance arises where there's ill discipline, that a disciplinary process needs to be followed that's fair. The other point that was that is raised is, it said that we were asked, did we take legal advice? No, we didn't take legal advice. But I should say there were 3 qualified lawyers on the panel. Should we? Then it was said that we ruled that. The question is there a power of justified exclusion? I think is the question, and it's implied that we've said that there isn't. There is a power of exclusion if the stewards find that there's disorder, or indeed that they apprehend that there's going to be disruption to the conference. Let's say there's a Just Stop Oil stunt and someone wants to spray paint Ed Davey when he's at this platform. Of course, you can exclude those people from the premises. That isn't what this is about. This was a decision that was taken after the close of conference to impose a disciplinary sanction for future conferences by email after the event. So I hope that clears that up. But if there are any follow-ups, I'm happy to take them.
Yeah, so we're running quite late now, so if we just do very quick supplementaries and responses, please. Gareth Epps first.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the explanation. It would be invidious for me to get into the individual case, but I was on Conference Committee 25 years ago where the power to exclude was set up, and it's disappointing that the decision had been reported on social media without the case being put on the party website or in the report. I was wondering if David could say something more about the circumstances for the delay and what discussions are going to take place with Conference Committee and the Chief Steward, who have, in many ways, ultimate responsibility for the personal safety of everyone at conference, which is paramount in this case.
Well, in terms of delay, I think I can answer. I think I've hopefully referred to some of the issues we've had this year in my previous comments. In terms of discussions with the Conference Committee, it's not really within our remit to tell the Conference Committee how to run the conference, and we've been very clear, and you will see when the decision is published, which will be this week, that we make clear that stewards do have authority to police the events, but what they don't have is a disciplinary role to punish people, as opposed to maintaining order and ensuring that the conference runs in an orderly way. And of course, if conference wants to give them that power, then it can. Yes.
Thank you. You said during your main remarks on the report that you felt that your committee or your panel had a responsibility to the members to ensure that they were not being treated unfairly. Will you concede at least that it is unfair that people are at risk of undergoing physical assault, and that there does need to be a power of justified future exclusion? And will you work with all the committees responsible to ensure that that power exists and can be exercised?
Okay, well, first of all, we are not a body usually that makes findings of primary fact, because we're here to review the decisions that are made. And I think it would be invidious for me to accept or not the premise of your question, which is what happened in that particular incident a year ago. Clearly a process was not followed that should have been followed to adjudicate that allegation. In terms of maintaining safety at the event, I'm not sure I can do more than repeat my comments that I made earlier, which is that is part of the steward's responsibility. There is a disciplinary process which can include any number of sanctions, including expulsion from the party, if in the case of an assault. And obviously it's important. What this incident really related to was somebody apparently who'd had too much to drink. And if somebody appears to be liable to be acting in that way, of course, they should be excluded from the premises if it's a bar or anywhere else. So, I mean, I think that's the issue, but I think it would be wrong for me to comment on an individual case.
Thank you, David. We don't have time for the other questions because we're over when we should have finished, in fact. So we're now going to, so thank you, David, we're now going to, so we're now going to move to a series of 7 votes, which you can take part in here in the hall or online. All the votes have already been open online for a while, so we won't need to wait for those, so we should be able to get through them quite quickly. So first we'll vote on whether to confirm Rebecca Williams as a Federal Appeals Panel member. There's biographical information about her in Conference Daily. Can I see those in favour? And those against? That's, yes, very clearly overwhelming, and it's NEMCON online. So Rebecca Williams is confirmed. Next we'll vote on the Federal Board report. Can I see all those in favour of approving the report? Thank you. And all those against? So that's overwhelmingly carried, and it was the same online as well. Now, can I see all those in favour of approving the report of the Campaign for Gender Balance? Great. And those against? Yep. That's great. So that is approved. Can I see all those in favour of approving the report of the Federal Communications and Elections Committee? And those against? 15 no. So again, that's clearly approved. Can I see all those in favour of approving the report of the Federal International Relations Committee? 14 and any against? Looks like NEMCON, doesn't it? Next, can I see all those in favour of approving the report of Federal Council? And those against? Overwhelmingly carried. And finally, can I see all those in favour of approving the report of the Federal Appeals Panel? And those against? That was also overwhelmingly carried. Yep. Thank you to the movers of the reports and to the questioners and the many other people who submitted questions that we didn't have time to take. And I'd also like to thank my aide here, Shafaq Mohammed, and my aide in the hall, Chris Mains. This is the end of tonight's session, so enjoy the fringes. Thank you.